Welcome to Headlines. This is Ari Wasserman sitting in for Dovid Lichtenstein. However, I will not be sitting in fully for Dovid because Dovid is actually going to join us on the show right at the beginning, and we're going to have an important update. He's going to be having a conversation with Rabbi Dr. Glatt, who was a guest on the show last week when the conversation focused on the coronavirus, the unfortunate plague that is hitting throughout the world, and they are going to update the conversation that they had from last week. Dovid, thanks for joining us, and please take it away.
This is Dovid Lichtenstein, and welcome to the Yeshiva Shalmala. And this week, I am not hosting, but we will have the fabulous Rabbi Ari Wasserman, who gets better numbers than me many times. He gets 50,000 listeners to a good program. But Adarabba, I'm not Makana. He does a better job. His more Harbatzis Torah. Mi yitein kol am Hashem neviim. Halavai should be zeichet the big Harbatzis Torah. But I'm going to be on just for a short while here to talk about the coronavirus and some updates. We're going to have as a guest, I'm going to have Rabbi Dr. Glatt. He's the head of infectious diseases in Mount Sinai. And I'm going to strongly disagree with him. You see, it's not just Rabbanim or Yeshivas who I disagree with. I disagree sometimes with people from the medical establishment too, just as much. And here's what I think. There are 200 cases in New York. We've seen in Italy, South Korea, it's growing, it's doubling every 6 days. If you do the math, this week we have 200, next week 400 in the New York area, 800, 1,632. In 8 weeks, if there's nothing done to stop, we could have 100,000 people, chas v'shalom, in the New York area. It's coming. It's coming fast, and it's coming to your community. Maybe in days, maximum a week or two. And when it does, your healthcare system will be overwhelmed. Look what happened in Italy. The healthcare system is overwhelmed. An article, I think it's in today's Times, citizens being treated in hallways. It's a picture of a healthcare worker lying flat on the floor after working some extended shift, breaking down. Healthcare workers are dying. They're deciding in Italy which patients get oxygen, which die. They're not intubating older patients, it says, or some older patients. They just don't have the staff. Well, the only way to prevent this from happening is social distancing. Today, not tomorrow. You know, I say a story of a developer who was, to develop, you have to be very optimistic. So he fell off the 20th floor of his building, and as he passes by the 3rd floor, somebody yells out to him, "No, how's it going?" He says, "So far, Baruch Hashem, great." Well, Chachamena of Beis. What could happen in Italy? The only way is to start now. Here's an astonishing thing. If there are 100,000 people, which the math says if it keeps doubling every 6 days, we would have in 8 weeks, there are only 25,000 hospital beds in New York City. And you want to hear something even scarier? 1,200 ICU beds in the entire New York City. Right? So I beg community leaders, Rabbanim, Rosh Yeshivas, what should they do? No shul. Close the shuls. No schools, no kiddeshim, no smachot, no simchas, no bar mitzvahs, no chasanas, no restaurants. Don't go to work if you don't have to. No gathering, right? Even help at home. Start creating self-quarantine. It's the only way to stop it. And I think halachically I'm correct. I'm going out on a limb. I'm going to disagree with my guest who says stay calm. I say don't stay calm. You know, la halacha, it's famous, the Magen Avraham and Simon Shin Lametz of Cotton Gimel says, you mechal Shabbos for a sakana, up to how much? 1 in 1,000. Right? Rabbi Kivegin Madura Kama, it's interesting, Ma Mishneim Kivnu Ba'ofen Echad, he says the same thing, Madura Kama Simon Samach, he says 1 in 1,000. In Italy, because the medical system is so strained, according to the Times as experts, and you could read it, and it's elsewhere online, the fatality rate is 5%. That's 5 in 100, which is 50 per 1,000, certainly much greater than the 1 in 1,000 that both Rabbi Kiva Ega and the Magen Avraham say you should be Mechal Shabbos for. 50x of the share of the Magen Avraham and Rabbi Kiva Ega certainly rises to the level of Pikuach Nefesh. So I know to say no shul, how could you say that? And the answer is because the Pikuach Nefesh, V'machal Shabbos, what do we say? Mutav Shechal Shabbos Echad, Kedei Sheyishmer Shabbos Es Harbe. Certainly, Chil Shabbos is a deraisa, it's Beskila B'mezid, Chatas B'shay. Going to shul is a drabanan, right? So I say halachically I'm correct. No shul, stop it now. So my fabulous Talmud Chacham research assistant, Rabbi Berkowitz, found me a letter from Rabbi Kiruv. And I said it last week, I said, we had on a big Talmud Chacham from Eretz Yisrael, a tzaddik, who said, go to Shul, it'll save you. And I noted, I said, go to Shul and it'll save you. Shulchan Aruch in Kuftes Vav and Yerodea says, the Ramah says, when there's a plague in the city, run for your life. Now, we could assume that the Ramah actually died while running from a plague. We could assume running, the Ramah went to Shul, and it didn't help, the Ramah didn't say it would help him. The Magen Avram brings it in our Chaim. He brings it from the Shulah. The Ramah brings it from the Maril. We could assume the Maril went to Shul. We could assume the Magen Avram went to Shul. And we certainly could assume that Shalah HaKadosh went to Shul. And they didn't say it would save them. They said, run for your life. So I have halachic, at least a diuk with Shul. But there's a letter here Rabbi Berkowitz found from Kiruv. It's during the plague that occurred in Europe, in Poland and in Germany, in 1831. There was a cholera plague. And he writes a letter to his Talmud, the great Rebbe Leo Gutmacher, and he writes about how they should not allow more than 15 people in the shul to create a quarantine. And Rabbi Kiruv says they should put a policeman in every shul, that if anybody wants to come and it's more than 15, to send him home. Let him daven at home and maybe make a second minyan. But there should be no crowds. And Rabbi Kiruv was successful in stopping the plague to the point where the Prussian king sent him a letter of thanks and an approbation, and that letter is a very fascinating letter. It's nidfas in the Chut HaMisholish. So we see that both in the Shulchan Aruch and the Magen Avram, as well as this letter from Rabbi Kiruv, that there is precedent to say, stop, close the shuls. It's not worth dying for it. Right? And that's my position here. So I'm going out on a limb. I'm saying, yes, be very alarmed. And pikuach nefesh is doiche everything, not like my guest who's saying be calm. And so in a few weeks, you'll tell me I was right or wrong. The only way to stop it is through quarantine. It's pikuach nefesh. Okay, let's go to Rabbi Dr. Glatt. He's the head of infectious diseases in Mount Sinai.
Joining us is Rabbi Glatt, who is both a Rav, a Musmach, and also professor and chair of infectious diseases at Mount Sinai, rabbi in the Young Israel of Woodmere. Unusual to find somebody who wears these two hats. Welcome, Rabbi Dr. Glatt.
Shalom Aleichem. Thank you for having me.
So last week we interviewed you, and you were relatively sort of saying, let's not get into panic mode. Let's just continue life as usual, just wash your hands more often. If somebody's sick, don't go to shul, etc. Has anything changed since then?
So I wouldn't have phrased it in that way, because we have been making very strong recommendations about changing the way people are doing business already for a long time. Due to COVID-19, we made some of these recommendations even just with influenza and other respiratory illnesses. But people need to understand that we are going to be making recommendations on a regular basis, and they're going to be changing, and they may even be diametrically opposite of previous recommendation. And people need to listen to their local experts and their rabbanim, because some of these are going to be shilas that need to be asked to poskim as well as medical experts. So most important, and we've been stressing this, is that people should not be going out of their houses if they have respiratory illnesses. Only time they should go is to the doctor if they need to. If they don't need to go, it's better not to go to the doctor. Just stay home. Don't infect other people. Don't go to shul. Don't go to minyan. Don't go to simchas. Don't go to shivas. Person should stay home. This is Yeharig Vayava. And unfortunately, it could be literally. A person could get other people sick, even if you're not that sick yourself. You could get other people, especially older people, especially people who have underlying illness. You must stay home. There are no exceptions to this rule other than if you have to go to the doctor or to the emergency room. Otherwise, stay home. You should try to segregate yourself as possible, depending on your apartment or house, from other people. They shouldn't be staying in the same room with you. You should try to at least be 6 feet away from them. There has to be an increase in hand hygiene, people learning how to cough and sneeze properly, disposing of tissues properly, and not exposing other people, cleaning surfaces that are touched on a regular basis, and making sure that we're doing everything possible. The shuls need to do this, the houses need to do this, the schools need to do this. Because the next step, if people don't listen to this, is to start to make additional social distancing recommendations, which we've already begun doing and have increased them. And amongst those recommendations are the recommendation that we tell people at this point in time that we have recommended not to have social functions of large gatherings of people that are not halachic.
So what happens if somebody has a chasana?
So if you're in an area where there is COVID-19, so this is something that the individual balabatim making that chasana have to have a serious consideration. They certainly, at a minimum, should be telling all of the guests, you're not welcome, no matter who you are. You could be the brother of the chasana or the kala. You're not welcome at the chasana if you're not feeling well.
But Rabbi Glatt, we know now that it could be active up to 14 days asymptomatic, right? So somebody could be coming to the chasana, right? Somebody could be.
The fact that you just said is incorrect.
Well,
we don't know that people can be asymptomatic for 14 days and be shedding virus.
How many days can they be? How many days can they be?
So we don't know that. We don't have full information, but
it's certainly some period of time, right?
There may be periods of time when it's
okay. So I'm asking you: somebody could be coming to this wedding who's asymptomatic, get other people sick who may die, right? So my question would be, why would somebody go to a wedding when they could possibly be killing somebody?
So the same question could be asked: why are they going to work? Why are they going to the supermarket?
Well, a lot of work, a lot of places are now working from home, right? So schools have shut down. So if it's a suffix, I'm asking you as a Rav, if somebody says I'm a suffix roidif, everybody is now becheska suffix roidif, right? Or not, but is a suffix roidif. You can't be becheska suffix. If everybody's a suffix roidif, why shouldn't we stop? If you may be a roidif when you go to a wedding, you may be a roidif when you go to a bar mitzvah, you may be a roidif when you go to shul. And how would you feel if somebody died or a few people died because of you going to a chasana, to a wedding, or to a shul?
So again, these are questions that the poskim have to paskin for their community.
I understand that, but I'm asking you what's your opinion as a rabbi and a thing?
The question.
Yeah, okay.
I'm happy to try to answer the question.
Yeah.
It is critically important for each community to know what the risks are in that community. For us to say right now, based upon everybody being a possible suffix rodef or a suffix carrier, that every single Jewish community in the world should shut down, not have minyanim, not have yeshivas, not have any sort of interaction with each other, is just not feasible, and it's not medically correct at this point in time.
Rabbi Glatt, you say it's not feasible. The NBA shut down. The NBA has shut down, right? All the Ivy League schools have shut down, right? They've shut down the high schools in Muncie. The Ramapo is shut down its schools, right? New York City is about to shut down its subways. I mean, do we want another few thousand people to get it before we decide to shut down?
So again, if the government is going to shut down and make that very, very significant public health decision, so then of course the Rabbanim would paskin that you should follow those advice. At the present time, that isn't the government recommendation, that isn't the CDC recommendation. The recommendation is everybody should remain calm and very, very vigilant, and in appropriate situations there should be quarantines. In some communities that may be the whole community. In some cities, or theoretically even in larger areas, that may be appropriate. At the present time, as I'm talking with you right now, that is not the recommendation by the experts at the CDC. That's not the recommendation of the Department of Public Health. Those aren't the current recommendations. They may become recommendations.
Let me ask you a question, Rabbi Glatt. Going to shul is at best a drabanan, right? Why would we tell people to potentially put them or certainly others at risk, or their parents or their grandparents at risk, to be yaitza when the Shulchan Aruch says yishtadel adam leilach l'beis hakneses? Say, why would you want to put your grandparents or your parents, if they're elderly, at risk of dying to go to shul? Explain that to me halachically.
So very simple. You can drive to shul. In driving to shul, you could also get into an accident. Are we telling people that they should never drive to shul?
Good question.
We have principles called Dosh Bei Rabin. We have a principle that says that acceptable risks are allowed to be accepted by people, even though there's a theoretical risk. Now, individuals who have a high risk, they should absolutely stay home. If a person feels that they are at such a risk, they absolutely should stay home. If, in fact, the community risk is significant enough, then the poskim, based upon medical advice for that community, and I would say that would include recommendations from the public health officials and the CDC, they should be making such medical advice available to the poskim, and the poskim can say, yes, we want to close all the shuls in the community, as has been done in some communities with both medical and halachic guidance, and I certainly would be in favor of that for each community to make that decision, but it has to be made in accordance with reasonable assumptions of risk that people are allowed to take. And when those risks become more than reasonable, and that's a medical and then halachic decision, that those risks need to be then identified and quantified as possible. You can't always do that. And then sometimes just best judgment should be made. At this point in time,
Rabbi Glatt,
it doesn't apply to every community.
Rabbi Glatt, I would just say that in the New York community, look, in New Rochelle, we know that there are, 50, 100 people, right? In Monsey, they've been in the atrium, they identified waiters. They identified people in New York City, right? Nobody knows how many more people have it because it seems it could be a while until there is a great level of asymptomatic disease. This is what I'm reading in the thing. I cannot fathom why for going to shul we would put somebody at risk, and a child who's 15, who's in the greatest of health, could come home, go to shul, come home, kiss his grandfather, who will die because of that. And I don't understand why when we're chayshish, and when we have a Ramad in Shulchan Aruch and a Magen Avram that says when there's a Magefa Be'ir, you should run as fast as you can. And we could assume that the Ramah is somebody who would have been makbid on a minyan, and the Shalah, who the Magen Avram brings, and the Maril were all makbid on minyan. They said you should absolutely run, even though there will be no minyan. I think that when the World Health Organization has called it a pandemic, we are in that situation. And I think that if somebody goes to shul and they get somebody else sick, they have to seriously consider where they killed the other person.
Okay, so I have to say that some of the facts that you're presenting are incorrect or a lack of full understanding of what it means to be in a pandemic. A pandemic doesn't mean that every single person should stay home and not leave their house. And that's something that is critically important for every community with its medical experts and the Department of Health and the CDC to help give us guidance, because that same argument could be made that nobody should ever go out if they have the flu because they could potentially go and incapacitate somebody. So therefore, what you would be suggesting, if you carried it to its logical conclusion, is that every shul should shut down during the winter months when there's a lot of flu. There's many, many more people that have been killed by flu than by COVID, which is transmitted in a very similar way. And that simply isn't the accepted halacha. While I agree with you, all the poskim that you mentioned, if it comes to that, they absolutely should be followed. That is a decision that needs to be made with medical advice. Now, individuals that are unfortunately sometimes increasing the level of hysteria may or may not be knowing all of the information. And I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't do anything about this. And I'm not suggesting that if that is the right medical recommendation, that we should close schools and should close neighborhoods, but then we have to close the restaurants. We have to tell people not to go to work remotely. We have to tell people that food will get delivered to them, or that we'll have to work out some sort of a system in place. We also have to realize that when those people stay home, how are hospitals and other emergency providers going to be providing their care? So there are always unintended consequences of making draconian measures when they may not be indicated. When they are indicated, then we have to figure out a way how to do all of those things properly and correctly.
Okay, so I just want to point out two things. The authorities right now believe that its fatality is 10x of the flu, 1,000% of the flu. Not 100, but 1,000% of the flu. That's what I'm just reading from what says. So let me just make 2 points. One is it's 10x, so it's a very substantial difference. And additionally, being that they say the germs could stay on the surface for up to 3 days, on clothing for 2 days afterwards. Like one of the guys in Japan said it's the most contagious thing he's ever seen. By the time we wake up and say, okay, let's close it, if there are 10,000 people who have it, it's going to be too late. So I would say now is the time to close the yeshivas, close the shuls, close the schools. Everybody stay home for 2 weeks. Go to work only if you absolutely have to. Many work environments, including our own, are saying people could work remotely, because if it gets added a box with its fatality rate, we could see in America millions of people die. And the way to avoid it is in advance, not afterwards.
But I have to disagree with the medical information you're providing. The mortality rates are not what you say they are. It is not the most contagious disease that we've ever encountered. It certainly is a disease that can cause significant mortality. I don't want to be misunderstood. It is a disease that can cause very significant mortality, nebuch, and it is a disease that is highly contagious. However, that doesn't mean that everybody in the United States, in order for this to be effective, as you're saying, everybody go hibernate for 2 weeks. So you have to have a plan in place how you're going to physically do that in terms of making sure that people can have food and water and all sorts of appropriate other essentials of life while you're, quote, shutting down the country for a 2-week period of time, which will not be easily accepted nor easily put into place. And all you may accomplish by doing that is just altering how the disease is going to be spread, and what you'll do after that 2-week period of time is up, you'll be back possibly in the same exact position. That's not to say that that may not be appropriate, and that's not to say that it may not be appropriate right now even for certain communities, but these are decisions that need to be made by the medical advisors with halachic poskim, and poskim of a great stature, who need to tell us. And if in fact they say that the community should be put into quarantine, then by all means we should follow those poskim.
Okay, but the World Health Organization, I'm reading from their site, is 3.4% mortality rate as of March 3rd.
But it's a skewed number. It doesn't take
as opposed to the flu. The flu.
But I'll explain to you why that number is incorrect.
Okay.
That number only looks at patients with severe disease because they didn't screen any patients with mild disease. So you're looking at a denominator that is much, much, much higher than the one that they reported. So if you assume, as you're telling me yourself, that there's so many asymptomatic and mildly symptomatic people, so that means that the mortality will go down dramatically. Baruch Hashem. Now, it's not to say that it isn't a very serious illness for older patients, and especially debilitated older patients. And those are the patients that should be self-quarantining or certainly minimizing as much as possible their contact with anybody else.
Now, here's another
very good
fear.
Things that you're telling us.
Rabbi Glatt, but here's another thing that one of the World Health Organization members mentioned. He said if it spreads, right, what would happen is it would not take much to overwhelm the hospital's intensive care units, and more than that, the use of oxygen machines, which they have a limited amount of. And he said at that point, they will be making decisions. If you're over 50, we will not give you oxygen, and you should just die without care. If you're younger than 50, we will give you oxygen. And he said it won't take much of an influx of patients till they have to make choices, who lives and who dies. I've never heard something like this. This is miba magefa that we're living through. Why wouldn't we be machmer? I don't understand that.
So again, we should be machmer when it's appropriate to be machmer. Closing down the country right now is just not medically indicated. It may be that some communities are currently indicated, but I don't want to rehash the same things over and over again. It won't accomplish anything. Each of these decisions needs to be made, as all halachic decisions regarding expert advice, with the input of the experts, the poskim and paskening, and they have siyata d'shmaya and a lot of tefillah and a lot of emunah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we're hopefully doing the right things. I don't claim that my answer is the only and sole answer. I claim that it is the currently accepted medical advice from all of the experts that I've spoken with, and this is the current recommendation in many places. In some places, they've already gone to far more drastic quarantines and appropriate shutting down of shuls, and kol hakavod to the poskim for saying that. And when the poskim tell me that we're supposed to do that, I will be the first person to say that's exactly what we should do.
Rabbi Glatt, it's always an honor. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Kol tov. Thank you very much for having me.
Bye-bye.
Now let's get back to our regularly scheduled program. This week's topic is, quote-unquote, Heter Kiruv. What does that mean? Now, that's what I was wondering when I heard about it the first time a few weeks ago. My daughter has a friend who was looking around what to do this summer, and she found a camp, a Kiruv camp, focused on bringing people back, and she had concerns because she saw that the camp was lenient on various halachas. For example, they allowed swimming, live concerts during the 9 days. They were lax on Kol Isha and various other halachas. And it was based on the concept of Heter Kiruv, that for purposes of Kiruv, we can be lenient in halacha. And our question is that true? For Kiruv, can we be lenient? And do the ends justify the means? Now, this show is not only for quote-unquote Kiruv professionals. Many questions come up for most of Kol Isha. For example, inviting non-observant Jews for Shabbos when we know they're going to drive, or giving somebody who's non-observant, for example, a coworker, something to eat. We know they're not going to say a bracha. Shaking hands with the opposite gender. We don't want to offend them. We want to create a Kiddush Hashem. Having non-mevulsha wine at our Shabbos table when somebody non-observant is there. How about men being mekarev women, having conversations in Torah with a secular woman? Now, obviously, Kiruv is a massive mitzvah, and it is incredibly gratifying when we can help a secular Jew become shomer Torah mitzvahs. But there are absolutely challenges along the way. And I'll just give a few examples of challenges that I personally have encountered during Kiruv in various areas over the past 20 years or so. So when I was teaching a class for a Kiruv organization, I used to volunteer at UCLA, and there was a group that I used to teach, and there would be primarily boys who came, but women used to come as well to the group, UCLA students, oftentimes scantily clad, and I had to go to the head of the organization, the person who managed the whole learning Seder there, and I told him if she's scantily clad, I just can't teach Torah to her, and we had to arrange that when that would happen, he would nicely usher such a girl to another group. So these things come up all the time on the campuses. Once we had a Shabbos guest, a Kiruv opportunity, and the person did cocaine in the bathroom, and there was once living here in Yerushalayim, we had a birthright trip come. It was quite a large group, 20, 30 people, secular Jews, and their madrich introduced himself that he was not Jewish. He was an Arab, and his name was Hashem. Sounds like Hashem. So he was a nice person. It was enjoyable, quote-unquote, to have him at the table, but in the end of the day, that's something we would like to have known when we were doing Kiruv at our table. Another example, I've taught and teach at Or Sameach and HaTorah, and when students deal with gender issues, LGBT issues in their families, going to the intermarriages of siblings, what do we tell them? How do we coach them on those issues? So before introducing our guests today, I just want to go through the riddle of the week. Parshas Kitisa, this week's Parsha, has quite extensive discussions of Shabbos Kodesh, one of the halachas brought in Shulchan Aruch and Simon Shin Zayin in the Orach Chaim. The very first halacha talks about how we should speak on Shabbos, that on Shabbos we have to speak differently from the rest of the week, and there are two important points that I want to bring out here. Number one is that we don't speak about inyanei chol. We don't talk about things that are only weekday, that have no religious significance on Shabbos. So if it's totally chol, if it's profane, it's secular, we don't talk about it on Shabbos. And even things that are mutter to talk about Shabbos, on Shabbos, says the Shulchan Aruch, asur laharbos. We have to be mekatzer. We have to speak about them. If it's not Torah, if it's not things that are very significant for enhancing the Shabbos, we should keep it short. So the question is, in this week's Parsha, where do we have a remez in a pasuk to this halach, or these two halachas? Then when it comes to speaking of inyanei chol, we cannot speak, and when it comes to even certain things that are permitted to speak about on Shabbos, we have to make it brief. We have to be mikatzer. Okay, to introduce our esteemed list of guests for today, we are going to start out with Rabbi Schachter. Rabbi Schachter is the son of the esteemed Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Hershel Schachter. He is going to actually give us a beautiful overview of the topic that we are talking about. So that's why I kept the introduction very short today, because Rabbi Schachter is going to do my job. Next, we are going to hear from the esteemed Rosh Yeshiva of Aish HaTorah, Rabbi Yitzchok Berkowitz, talking about the Heter Kiruv as well. Thereafter, we are going to hear from Rabbi Zevulun Schwartzman, who is the esteemed Rosh Kollel in Romema in Yerushalayim, the grandson of Rav Aaron Kotler. We are thereafter going to hear from Rabbi Daniel Travis, who has written extensively on the various issues and interesting cutting-edge shaylas that come up in the Kiruv world. Thereafter, we're going to hear from Rabbi Yitzchok Feldheim, who is a real Kiruv professional, originally from Lakewood, still lives in Lakewood, and he's out there in the Kiruv world and has a lot of interesting things to share with us. And last, we are going to wind up with Rabbi Shlomo Elkan, who is the founder and director of the Chabad at Oberlin College, who is going to explain to us the real metzius of living on a campus in the middle of nowhere. How do you go about doing Kiruv, and how are those encounters with the secular Jews? How does that influence one's life? How does that influence one's children? So that is going to be a very interesting conversation about how it is to be a shaliach at a campus. He's one of hundreds of shlichim, probably about 500 shlichim worldwide on college campuses, amongst the approximately 5,000 shlichim of Chabad that are out there in the world dealing with Kiruv on an ongoing daily basis. Joining us now is Rabbi Shay Schachter. Rabbi Schachter is the Rosh Beis Medresh of the Young Israel of Woodmere. He is also the camp rabbi of Camp Simcha, and he is also an esteemed son of the Gaon, Rav Hershel Schachter. Rabbi Schachter, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Rabbi, for having me. It's always a great pleasure.
Well, Rabbi Schachter, I wanted to open the show with you because recently I listened to a shir of yours, and you talked about the Heter Kiruv, and the message that I took away from your shir was that being lenient on Kiruv shaylas is indeed fairly controversial. It is subject to a lot of machlokes. So I wanted to get you on the show so you can give us an overview of the divergent views on this Heter.
Okay, so it's a very fascinating question, and let me just introduce it by saying, far be it for me to give any guideline. I know that you plan to have other very chashuv Talmidei Chachamim and poskim who are going to give their opinion. So really, I just want to give a little bit of the background to this question, and for people to have an appreciation for how complicated it is and how divergent the opinions can sometimes actually be. One of the more obscure svarim of the Chafetz Chaim, he's very well known for his Sefer Shmiras HaLashon. The Chafetz Chaim is obviously very well known for his Sefer Mishnah Berurah. And the Chafetz Chaim had so many other svarim that perhaps are not learned as often. So one of those is the Sefer Chomas Hadas. And there the Chafetz Chaim talks about a lot of Inyanei Hashkafa. And at one point in Maimar Gimel, he has a discussion about Kiruv, which I found very fascinating. And there the Chafetz Chaim says the way that we have to approach the whole issue and the whole conversation about Kiruv is to look at it in the following light. And he compares this, he likens it to a person who is roa es chavero tovea benahar, as if you see somebody who is submerged underwater, who's suffocating, and you're watching this go on, and you feel inside of your heart that you absolutely have to do everything you can to extricate that person and to rescue them from the danger. And if you're unable to do it yourself, obviously you'll go out and find somebody else who has the ability to save them, who knows how to swim. Says the Chafetz Chaim, that's the natural instinct of any human being. That's what we would respond if we would see such a terrible situation. And writes the Chafetz Chaim, this should be our perspective, this should be our feeling when we see people in the world who the way he categorizes it is Shemerov Chalishas Daitam V'Goldel Terdasam B'Havle Azman. Here you see the godless of the Chafetz Chaim. I mean, you can see it in a million different ways, but the Chafetz Chaim believes that people are not inherently evil. He says they just get absorbed with what's going on in the world, and they start to forget Toras Hashem, he says. And because of that, they're totally lost, and they're totally preoccupied with everything that's going on in their lives. And it's somebody's job to realize that that is an absolute suffocation. That is a spiritual suffocation. And therefore, he says, we have to see it in the same way, and we need to take our responsibility as seriously as we would if somebody's actual life were in danger. The same perspective needs to be taken when somebody's spiritual life is in danger as well. So that's the general perspective that the Chafetz Chaim has, which I think is a very beautiful one. But the problem then becomes, how far should one be willing to go for the sake of Kiruv Rechokim? Are there any limitations? Are there any restrictions? Do we say that, well, if it's Pikuach Nefesh, that means you're allowed to do anything and everything, and therefore we would allow somebody to just have a carte blanche heter to do whatever they feel necessary to help be involved in Kiruv Rechokim? And I think that's really the specific question that you're trying to get at. Am I correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Okay, so I will say that last week I had a great privilege of being at a function that was hosted by Art Scroll. They were celebrating the end of the publishing of their English Mishnayos. So they had sent me an invitation, and it was my first time ever being at an Art Scroll event. And I was very excited because my father ended up coming as well. And when my father came, they sat us both down at a table right next to Hagon Rev Dovid from Flatbush, who was there. So that was always entertaining to spend time with Rev Dovid. And then the next person who was sitting over after Rev Dovid was Hagon Reb Reuven Feinstein, the son of Reb Moshe Feinstein. And Reb Reuven, the Rosh Yeshiva, was there, and I said this is such a great opportunity because tomorrow I'm giving a shiur and I'm planning to discuss a little bit about the Heter Kiruv, as they say it. And I said, I've heard from your father, B'Shem Reb Moshe Zatzal, that Reb Moshe had a very strong opinion about what one is allowed to do or not allowed to do when it comes to Kiruv Rechokim. And I asked Reb Reuven, did your father really believe that one is not allowed to bend the halacha even for the purpose of Kiruv Rechokim? And he said, absolutely. My father was very firm on his opinion. He then quoted his father's words from the Igros Moshe itself, where Moshe writes about the potential ability for somebody to invite a irreligious Jew over to their home when they know that that's going to be the cause for malacha, and Rav Moshe was very opposed to it. There's a sefer that's been printed from Reb Dovid Feinstein called Shalos Utshuvas V'Dibarta Bam, and there they also have a conversation that Reb Dovid Feinstein had with them about Kiruv Rechokim, and he says unequivocally that his father was very clear that Ein lahakel be'inyan shum halacha kedei l'Kiruv Rechokim. Rav Moshe took a very hardline approach that we would not be allowed to bend any rules of the Torah, any halacha, even though it's for the sake of Kiruv Rechokim, which, as the Chafetz Chaim said, is such an important value, is such an important idea that we all need to keep in mind. So that is, on the one hand, you have the perspective of Reb Moshe Feinstein, which, again, a couple of years ago, when they started, I don't know if you remember Rabbi Warren Goldstein from South Africa, the chief rabbi, he started this idea of the Shabbos Project, which at face value sounds like such a wonderful idea and is such a beautiful concept. And he is a very successful Makari from what I understand. And in South Africa, they have an unbelievable Kiruv apparatus going on, and it's going very well. And the opposition at the time was, again, nothing personal at all, but part of the opposition to the whole idea. Not everybody embraced the idea of the Shabbos Project, but part of the opposition was that who said that we really have a right to invite unaffiliated Jews over to our home on Friday night when we know that they are going to be traveling back in their cars and when we know that they are going to be doing malacha. At the time, when this first started, that was very heavily debated, and it was a big discussion. And I personally felt that I needed to ask the Rabbanim that I generally consult with when I have a shayla, because we had to make a decision whether we were going to participate. And both opinions obviously are valid, but you need to follow your psak that you normally follow in other areas of halacha and life. So I called up my father, and I called up Rav Asher Weiss as well. They are both my rabbeim. And I discussed the shayla with them, and both of them came to the same conclusion. And they both felt that it would be appropriate to invite someone over to your home on Shabbos. It's a little bit of a complicated argument, but the crux of the issue is two things. Number one, how can you say that you are causing the person to be Mechal Shabbos when, after all, this person, during the time that they would be at your house, would be driving to the supermarket, to the movie theater, to go on all kinds of errands, to go shopping, and to do all kinds of different things. So I am not causing them to drive on Shabbos. They would have driven on Shabbos regardless. All I'm doing is, instead of them driving to the supermarket, they're now going to drive to my house. So that's factor number one. Factor number two that they thought was very important to consider was the fact that when they're in my house, I have a right to say, we're a religious family. This is the way we conduct ourselves on a Shabbos, and we expect you to be respectful of the way we observe Shabbos. So while they're in my home and sitting at the table for 2 or 3 hours by the Shabbos Suda, they're not going to be touching their phones. They're not going to be texting. They're not going to be on the internet. And that means ostensibly that I am saving them from Chilul Shabbos that they otherwise would have done. Can you imagine this person, had they been home for those 3 hours, for that block of time, how many malachos they would have done, how many times they would have turned the phone on or off, texted somebody, picked up an email, checked something on the internet. And because they're in my house, not only am I not violating Lifnei Iver, to the contrary, perhaps one can argue that I'm saving them from violating Shabbos by them sitting for a couple of hours in my house and being respectful of my position of how I observe Shabbos. So that was the general argument. They both felt that we should encourage people to invite others over to our home. But again, that stands in contrast to the psak that Rav Moshe gave, which was a very clear one, that this should not be done.
Right. Now, if I could just interject, just to make sure I'm clear on this. According to Rav Moshe, it seems Shum Halacha was the quote, that he won't be lenient not only in the driving context on Shabbos, but Kol Isha for Kiruv and for at least Ashkenazic camp, where we're very makbid on 9-day swimming and music. He would be machmir across the board because he says Shum Halacha. But even in the psak of Rav Hershel Schachter and Rav Asher Weiss, it seems that that's a limited heter as it comes to driving, because the two tzfaras are they would drive anyway and they won't be mechalo Shabbos when they're by us, but it doesn't mean that they would be lenient in a more global way for Kiruv in general.
Absolutely, 100%. And let me also just add, just to give a little more credence to Rav Moshe's argument, the way Rev Dovid Feinstein explains his father's position. I don't know if this is exactly what Rav Moshe himself writes, but Rev Dovid said this is what his father felt, and that is, I'll just read from Rev Dovid's words, V'adarabba hamashpia, the one who is religious and trying to influence the one who is not, Tarech lishmar kol hadinim, you have to abide by all the halachos, and everything should be as you would normally live it in your religious life. Va'al yidei zeh memela yachol lios mashpia al acherim. Reb Dovid says that his father believed the greatest way to have a relationship with somebody who is aspiring to be religious, the greatest way for you to really have an impression on them is by showing them that you do not compromise your principles, that you are a person who abides by the halacha under all circumstances, and there's no greater way for you to show them the beauty of Torah than that. So that's the argument that Rav Moshe makes, again, as quoted by his son, Rev Dovid Shlita, but I think it's a very interesting argument that he's not saying that we should just not take into consideration all of these factors, but he says, in his opinion, it's a stronger possibility of potentially being makari of someone when you show them that we are not willing to bend the letter of the law and we are steadfast in our understanding of what the halacha demands that we do. I did notice there's a tshuva in the Shevet HaLevi where he also talks about this issue. And again, I think all the Gedolei HaPoskim in the last 50 years have had to have dealt with this either in writing or Baal Peh, because this is such a, with the explosion of the Baal Tshuva movement and the Kiruv movement, this is something that, has so many ramifications and needs to be dealt with. So the Shevet HaLevi in Chelek Vav also has a discussion about this issue. And he says that he thinks that it's very hard to say an ironclad rule for all situations. Because on the one hand, obviously we need to do whatever we can to be involved in Kiruv V'chokim. On the other hand, he says, the Gemara says, Kshot atzmacha v'achar kach kshot acherim. One needs to make sure that they are living up to the halachic standard of life, and only afterwards should they start worrying about how other people are living their lives. So he says, this is a conflict that we have been confronted with in our generation. And he writes that Sav Hasha, do we say that the calling of our time is Lahatzil Kol Masha Efshar Lahatzil? Look at the intermarriage rate in the world and look how much destruction there is in the Jewish community. Wouldn't our responsibility be to do whatever it takes to bring back any possible or potential neshama that we can? So this is the conflict that he has. And in the end, he writes that each case really needs to be judged very carefully in and of itself to understand whether or not this would be within the guidelines of what would be permissible, or perhaps not. I will say that we had an incredible opportunity about 2 months ago. We went to Eretz Yisrael. There was a group of 9 American Rabbanim who were sponsored to go to Eretz Yisrael to learn for a week together. I remember last year when we came, we spent some time with you, Rabbi Ari, and it was very special, if not for all the great Gedolei HaPoskim that we got a chance to spend time with. Just spending time with other Rabbanim, like-minded people, and Az Nidbru Yirei Hashem, that's already a beautiful concept in and of itself. But one of the personalities who we met with was the Rosh Yeshiva of HaTorah, Yitzchok Berkowitz. And personally, it was my first time ever meeting him. I was very taken by his tremendous insight and his thought, and how he really had such a clear mahalech on everything that we brought up with him and everything that was presented. And it was a really fascinating discussion. But one thing that really caught the attention of many of us in the room was, sometimes you go to a person's office and you see what they hang on the walls. And sometimes you see pictures of Gedolim, sometimes you see pictures of family members, of children, of grandchildren, and it says something about a person, what they choose to hang on the wall of their office. So, Rabbi Ari, what would you say was hanging on the entire wall of the office of Rabbi Yitzchok Berkowitz? He has this gorgeous office overlooking the Kotel, overlooking Makam HaMikdash. It's absolutely magnificent, but there's a very unusual picture that is the backdrop of his office.
Having just been in his office a few days ago and having the pleasure sitting with him, I was also struck by the size of the world map that basically almost covered the whole back of the office.
It's unbelievable, and it's almost like you can't ignore it. It's the strangest thing that a Rosh Yeshiva of his stature would put in his office, and he explained it to us, and none of us had the gall to ask him, but he brought it up on his own, and he said, you're probably wondering why I have a map of the world as the backdrop of my office. And he said, I'll explain. Because I feel that we are engaged in a battle all over the world, and it's our responsibility to be the soldiers who will save all of those lost members of our community who are all over the entire universe. And he said, when he looks at that map, every day when he walks into his office, he reminds himself that life is a mission, that life has a purpose, and that part of our very important goal needs to be to look out for every Jew all over the world. So I was very taken by that, and I thought that was such a beautiful perspective to have, but at the same time it really brings to question, well, if that's really the mission and that is the goal, how do we go about doing that? And that's why we need people like Rev Yitzchok Berkowitz to be the ones who can really decide what the guidelines should be and what perhaps they should not be.
Rabbi Schachter, thank you so much for joining us. That gives us a terrific overview of this whole sugya on the quote-unquote Heter Kiruv. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Have a wonderful day.
Joining us now is Rabbi Yitzchok Berkowitz, the famed Rosh Yeshiva of Aish HaTorah, and the founder and Rosh Kollel of the Jerusalem Kollel. And also, let's not forget, the Rav of the Anglo community in Sanredja Mochevet, but truth be told, I think he's become more the Rav of the Anglo community, Yerushalayim, and extending from there. Rabbi Berkowitz, it's such a pleasure to be here with you together in your office at Aish HaTorah.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. So, Rabbi Berkowitz, I officially on a volunteer basis have been in Kiruv for about 20 years on the campus at UCLA and then teaching at yeshivas, Kiruv yeshivas here. And just recently, a few days ago, my daughter has a friend who asked her the following question. This friend is looking into what she should do with her summer, and she's considering a camp, a Kiruv camp, but she's concerned because they rely a lot on, quote-unquote, a Heter Kiruv to permit a number of things. For example, swimming during the 9 days, live concerts during the 9 days, etc., etc. I personally had never heard of the phrase Heter Kiruv, and I wanted to get your take on what does that mean.
I never heard of the phrase Heter Kiruv either. I am unaware of any blanket heter for anything just for the sake of Kiruv. Absolutely every situation has to be weighed out using the 4 halakim of Shulchan Aruch. And of course, anything that's not mentioned in Shulchan Aruch, it's Shas Poskim, it's got to come from the Rishonim, it's not things that we make up. With regard to the particular issues that were raised, I don't know if you want to go into the very details of them. There is a general sense of heter that applies to many situations, and I'd say perhaps that the poskim talk about it indirectly. We have a halakha in Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch in Hilchos Shabbos tells us that in the case of a father that's told, and this was apparently not uncommon back in the olden days, that his daughter has been kidnapped, she's going to be brought up in a monastery. He was informed of this on Shabbos, he may have the opportunity to go and bribe some official to get her back, but it's got to be done quickly. So the halacha is that he is allowed to break Isurim Doraisa in order to get her back. Kol Shabbos Doraisa.
Because it's a pikuach nefesh situation.
It's not, the interesting thing is the Rashba who was asked this shaila was asked that maybe this is pikuach nefesh or safik pikuach nefesh, and he completely ignores that aspect of it. He does not deal with it. What we understand is pikuach nefesh is physical. There's a whole other mahalach. It's a whole other system when you're dealing with the questions of ruchnius. There it's a question of hutra tchuya, which means what outweighs what. And here, the way the Beis Yosef works through it, and his maskana is that what we say is that in a case of an Isser Zuta, breaking a relatively small Isser for the sake of preventing lots of big Isurim, the halacha is that you break the smaller one. The case over here is you're going to break one Shabbos for the sake of her being brought up as an observant Jew, as opposed to her growing up in a monastery and not subscribing to our religion altogether. So there it's considered an Isser Zuta. There are conditions that he does mention over there based on Tosas Shita, whereby we would permit one person breaking Shabbos for the sake of saving somebody else.
Like a chai.
Once again, you're drawing a parallel to Pikuach Nefesh. This is not Pikuach Nefesh. This is not a matter of the system of saving a life, of the Chai Behem. This is simply a matter of breaking one thing for the sake of a whole life of observance, where when it comes to an individual, the halacha certainly is that if the only way you can keep Kol HaTorah is by breaking something, one thing, the halacha is that you would have to. In the case of doing it for somebody else, there are conditions. Now, the post can talk about the case of the Shulchan Aruch, the case of the Mishnah Berurah goes into it in detail as well. What I haven't found the post to speak about all that much is what's very clear. Tosfos says it straight out, that if it's a matter of the person himself, a person himself is supposed to break one thing in order to be mezaki himself in something so much bigger, such as a life of observance. So as a matter of principle, if a person has a choice between remaining non-frum or doing something against halacha in a way that it may get him to be frum, he's really required to do that. It's a funny kind of a shaila because he's not asking it. He doesn't know anything. We are asking the shaila for him. But the rule would generally be that if you're talking about somebody breaking an Isser in a way that's going to help bring him back, the halach is we would tell him he definitely should. So, for example, someone is coming to a Kiruv situation, be it a Kiruv cap, whatever it is, and you tell him, well, listen here, in order for you to participate, you have to say Birkas HaTorah before we start talking any Torah. And he is somebody that is anti. Let's take that for an example. And he will see this as religious coercion. I want to hear what you have to offer. I'm not interested in the religious experience. I want to see that what you say makes sense. We tell him, no, I can't allow you to learn without Birkas HaTorah. It's an Isser Chomer to learn without Birkas HaTorah. That's one of the reasons the Beis HaMikdash was Charav, it says. The halacha would be, Chatei Kedei Shetizkeh. Better learn without Birkas HaTorah and maybe become frum someday. And by the way, it doesn't have to be a vadai, but it has to be that it makes sense. It has to be that it makes sense. This goes for almost any Isser. The only exceptions would be the Gimel Chamuras, Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayos, and Shvichas Damim, where the halacha there is, it's Yehored Bal Yaver. Yehored Bal Yaver means you're better dead than doing this Isser. Now, if somebody is giving his life, that means that he's not going to have the opportunity to do any mitzvahs after he's dead. So, if the Torah is telling us you've got to give your life for this, obviously the Torah is telling us that in this particular case, in the case of the Gimel Chamuras, it's worth sacrificing your whole future, just don't break this one. So we can't give somebody a head to go break one of the Gimel Chamuras for a lifetime of Shmiras Mitzvahs when the Torah says, no, it's more important not to do this Avir. So those are the exceptions.
Right, but everything else...
But everything else, the halacha would be that if to make a person do something that you know is going to turn him off, for example, you take him to a camp, well, swimming, questionable, you have to work out the details of it, but telling him that he can't shower during the 9 days, for example, you're not going to see this person again.
Right, but that's him doing something. We're talking about a camp facilitating an activity.
The camp facilitating the activity, if it's mutter for him to do, then what is the isser in the camp facilitating it? The camp is facilitating for him, for him to do what he's supposed to do. He's supposed to come to this camp, not be involved in anything that's going to turn him off, anything that is going to drive him away from Yiddishkeit, and on the contrary, bring him into a situation that he's going to want to.
So that would include swimming during the 9 days?
If that's what's necessary.
A live concert during the 9 days?
If that's what's necessary. One really has to determine whether that's necessary. Is that going to make a difference? Either because the lack of it will turn him off, which I wonder, but or even more so because the particular activity, say the concert, is something that's going to bring him closer. That's something that really has to be weighed out. The concept of Heter Kiruv, just do what you want, of course not. It has to be taken with Beis, Rosh, and really every detail has to be worked out, and really one has to decide, is this really necessary? Is this the right thing? If one comes to the conclusion that it is, then that's what has to be done.
Now, would that extend to the staff, the frum staff at the camp? For example, Kol Isha, or dancing and there are men around, or swimming along with their... Not mixed swimming, but, you know.
That's already a case of chatei kedei sheyitzke chavercha, where we need the conditions for it. In most of the cases, I believe that the conditions would be present. The conditions that are raised by the Beis Yosef, based on Tos Shita, I believe that they would be appropriate. Also, you have to weigh out every single case. You have to weigh out every single case. You also have to worry about the future of these madrichim and madrichot. If what we're talking about is the Isser alone, so there we go with these technicalities. If what we're talking about is taking good from kids and turning into less observant because their sensitivities are going to be lost, for example, that's a whole different story. We're not, we are not compromising on the chinuch we are giving our own children for the sake of being makar of people.
Now, would this, I don't want to use the phrase Heter Kiruv, but this concept, would that extend to Kol Isha and reliance on the famous Shita of the Sri Aish, which seemed to be very limited, actually. People have extrapolated from it. Heterim, and he was talking about post-World War II for Yeshua and that specific Kiruv organization, but would this be able to enable us to pull that tshuva from out of the archives?
Once again with Koed Rosh. With Koed Rosh, it's got to be done. We don't just give blanket heter.
Yeah.
It's understood, for example, that when you're dealing with like younger Jews, when you're dealing with teenagers, all the Kiruv classes aren't going to do it. A good kumzitz goes a lot further. So in such a case where you really think that what's going to bring them closer is the kumzitz, that's a different kind of cheshbon than just a blanket heter for Kol Isha in a camp.
Right. Now, if we could go from the camp context to the on-campus university context.
Yeah, campus is scary.
Campus is scary?
Campus is scary.
Headlines had a show on, is it mutter to go to secular college just a few weeks ago? If listeners haven't listened to it, go ahead. It's a few weeks ago. That's a plug for the show. So we have trained Kiruv professionals here, great organizations, of which the Rosh Yeshiva heads one of them. And we're sending out Rabbanim to the campus organizations, which are really places of promiscuity. And the question is, how far does it extend that we can send people into those situations?
Yeah, honestly, I have never sent anyone to the campus, but anyone that volunteers to go, I give a big bracha and I daven for them. Perhaps it's disrespectful, but it's hard to call it anything other than a Zoom mitzad ruchnius. It's very, very difficult to send people to such an environment for longer time and assume that they're not going to lose their sensitivities. It's very, very difficult. For those that have gone, many of them have told me that they were more affected by the supermarket than they were on campus, because on campus they were on guard, they were doing Kiruv. And just living out in the middle of nowhere and going to the supermarket where women don't dress properly and the interactions between men and women are beyond anything we would call our sensitivities. They have greater problems there. It's very difficult to say. It's very, very difficult to say. Someone who really feels that he's going to go out there and not lose his sensitivities and not slip, he should be blessed. And such a person, anything that he does, that he's doing in l'shem shamayim, he should have the siyata d'shmaya that it should work. To say that just anybody could go onto a college campus is not simple.
And especially even once they're there, I assume we would distinguish between learning one-on-one with a female as opposed to a group or a Shabbos table.
That's another story. I do not see any justification for a man being makar of women. To give a mixed class, to give a class in a mixed setting, so who's going to give it? Either the men or the women. Whoever it is, it's not going to be proper. It's got to be done. But when you're talking about actual kiruv, the way I always phrase it is, the Torah says lo sikruvu, and here we are doing kiruv. Like something doesn't work. Something doesn't work. You can't be makar of a person for real without a personal relationship. Men should be makar of men. Women should be makar of women. For the most part, Kiruv organizations that don't employ women to do Kiruv is for financial reasons. And how you can allow such a mikshol for the sake of saving money? I know money is tight, but I just don't see how you can justify that. Men should be makar of men, women should be makar of women. The truth of the matter is that women do a much better job of being makar of women. They understand the issues so much better than men do. So yes, the initial, the hello, how are you, that the man can do. The next step is, I think you'd hit it off well with my wife. Or let him employ another woman to do kiruv. I really think that it is wrong to have a man being makar of women one-on-one, and the whole kiruv process means really getting into their lives. It's establishing a close kind of relationship that it's just not in place. It just cannot be for a man to be makar of women.
Right. Now, one more question when it comes to kiruv. Maybe it's not exactly quote-unquote the Heter Kiruv, but it's honesty in kiruv. I know of a number of situations that Kiruv candidates, people who are not yet observant, have come to Shabbos tables and have really become frum and become energized and excited. And then it turns out a little bit into the process later on that they feel that they didn't have full disclosure, that we've given off the appearance of life, from life, religious life is perfect. The Torah is perfect, but there certainly are challenges with religious life. It's just how it is. No life is perfect. And the specific question is there a problem, a Gnevis Das problem, something along those lines? Do we have to fully disclose, or should we refrain?
I don't think the issue is Gnevis Das. I think the problem is that you will lose credibility with them once they realize that you didn't give them the whole story. You don't have to tell them everything wrong in the community. It's not going to take them long. It's not going to take them long to realize that that our society is not perfect. We're far less imperfect than any other society, but we definitely have our challenges, and they have to know that. And especially the fact that not everyone in our society is welcoming to Balei Tshuva, for example. Not everyone in our society is sensitive to where they're coming from. Not everyone in our society is going to be able to have a conversation with them without making statements that they're going to find offensive. I'm already talking about the beginning levels. Forget about everything involved in adjusting in the community, plus all the other stuff that's going on in the community. I think we have to be open about the fact that our community is far from perfect, but that it is still light miles ahead of the rest of humanity.
Yeah, it's funny, when people in the workplace are concerned about wearing a yarmulke, they're going to think we're weird. Or we have to go out to mincha, we say a bracha, and they think we're weird. And I tell them, we're the most normal people out there. Don't worry. It's all on a spectrum, and we're way above everyone else.
We're the only ones that are concerned about being weird.
right. You see the Arabs, and they'll pull up their carpets and daven right in front of us, and us, we're trying to hide wherever we can. So, fully understood. Rabbi Berkowitz, what a pleasure being with you, and we really appreciate you joining us on the show.
Thank you.
Joining us now is Rabbi Zevulun Schwartzman, the esteemed Rosh Kollel in Yerushalayim, the famed grandson of Rav Aaron Kotler, the founder of the Lakewood Yeshiva, and he is intricately involved also in Kiruv in various places, including in Russia. Rabbi Schwartzman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So, Rabbi Schwartzman, our topic of the day, our topic of the hour is the Heter Kiruv. What is the Heter Kiruv? I was wondering myself. So it turns out that there's a concept, at least in some organizations that do Kiruv, that we can be lenient in a number of halachas when it comes to Kiruv, because ultimately the ends justify the means. And that is the question that we want to analyze here on a more conceptual basis. Is there such a thing as a Heter Kiruv that we can be lenient in halacha? And do we ever say, at least in this context, that the ends justify the means?
Obviously, before we begin, in Torah, the concept of end justifying means does not exist. We do have v'chai b'hem v'lo sheyomus b'hem, and we have lo samir al adam re'echa. That's a chiyuv to save people, even at the price of being over isurim, right? Isurim. But these aren't, it's ends justifying the means. But the chiyuv, we're not doing there's a chiyuv to save a person. V'chai b'hem is we're mechuyev to, we are obligated to save every Jew, and that chiyuv is under these circumstances also. But at this point, without going into the halachic issue, whether pikuach nefesh is a hutra or dechuya, but even if which is a halachic concept, whether it's just like pushed aside or it's actually the Issa doesn't exist, that's not our issue here. But this is, at this point, it's not justifying a means that's not permitted, but at this point, this is his obligation. This is what he's obligated to do. Therefore, when we discuss the issue of Kiruv, since Kiruv, when talking about bringing a Jew back to Kiyum mitzvahs, we're talking about a Chiyuv. We're talking about a mitzvah. If the mitzvah is hatzalas nefashos, because someone who is the risk of leading a life void of Torah and mitzvahs is not a life, and that itself, saving him and bringing him back, is hatzalas nefashos. Especially if leading the life he's leading he's being over a lot of chomer de kisum that in a case that he's responsible for them. But even if he's not, there's hatzalas nefashos. There's like we say, there's involved in it the mitzvah of techocha. No, it's to set a person straight. To set a person straight. There's definitely chiyuvim gemurim here. We have to know the parameters of those chiyuvim, what we're mechuyev to do, and what we're not mechuyev to do, and not just not mechuyev to, obviously what we're not allowed to do. So the question is, what the gedorim of this of our chiyuv is, and not a question of are we going to be lenient about something in order to know whatever we're mechuyev to do, we have to do. Whatever we're not mechuyev to do, we're not allowed to do. Mm-hmm. The tools we have to give a person in Kiruv to make him about Shuvah is to open up his eyes enough that I want to be a different person. That's done by presenting a different reality to him. A different reality, and he sees the meaningfulness of that reality, not by, had a great time. Yeah, it was a great show, it was a great this, it was a great barbecue, it was a great this, and, with the social, it was great, I feel good about this, what this organization is doing. That feel good is not what that's not where it is.
It's showing the meaning in life.
Yeah.
Depth in life.
Real meaning. And what each person, everyone understands that on his level, what it is. But when you present half-baked goods, you don't see something else.
Right. Very nice. Very nice. So, Rabbi Schwartzman, if we can start going through certain shilas, some of the most common shilas that come up when people do Kiruv, the number one shilah that comes up very often is Shabbos is the key to showing people depth and meaning in life. And obviously we got to get them there. So if they're amenable to sleeping over, great. But if they're not, and oftentimes when they're just starting off, there's no concept of coming for 25 hours and shutting off all technology and shutting off their real life. So can we invite them with the knowledge that maybe they'll drive before Shabbos, but they're going to go home in that car? So how do we handle that lifnei iver question?
Well, the specific shayla that you're asking has been discussed by big Paiskim, by Paiskim. First and foremost, the Rosh Moshe discussed it. Again, it was a slightly different context. And Moshe clearly says that just to actually ask him to come, knowing that he will drive, Moshe's terms are very severe. He calls him a mesis, not just a question of lifnei iver, of putting an obstacle in front of somebody who's not knowledgeable, but actually like encouraging a person to violate and transgress the basics of Torah. And that doesn't just include, he says, which the mesis in the Torah, the encouragement to transgress is by avodah zarah, but he broadens it that it includes also isurim like Shabbos, and he clearly has a din of a mesis. According to Moshe, is a mesis, which is all. So it's regardless if the person, under other circumstances, Michal Shabbos, if he sits at home, he'll be turning on his TV. He may go for a drive to the mall, wherever he'll go. But I'm actually encouraging him to do a specific act of Chilul Shabbos. And there's no way that could become mutter, the way Moshe puts it. It's directly asking him to come, knowing that coming means transportation. But again, this psak involves the idea that there's a Chilul Shabbos that he's doing right now in order to get here. Could we weigh and say that I am causing him to do a Chilul Shabbos, that it's worth to cause him to do this Chilul Shabbos? He may do another Chilul Shabbos, but I'm rather cause him to do Chilul Shabbos. This is worth it because then it'll become a Baal Tshuva. We don't have the tools to weigh that. And we won't give him those tools to weigh that. And therefore, it's very difficult and problematic. Naturally, there's different issues when I give the person a place and a way to where he could stay by me, and I invite him to stay. And clearly, if it's not clear from his reaction that he will not stay over, not clear, but I know there's a chance he won't stay over. But it's clearly not.
It's not a vadai.
It's not a vadai. And he has all the opportunities to stay in full comfort. Not that the accommodations I gave him, he'd rather go back to his home than stay there. The accommodations that are very, very suitable, very comfortable, very convenient. And then there's a lot more material for such a situation. But again, the specific situation, that would need a psak for every case individually, with all the details involved of the benefit analysis, obviously, and how far you got away from the lifnei iver, which obviously is not to be answered as a general question.
Right. That's very fact specific.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so the next question is, assuming we get them to the Shabbos table, the Yontif table, in a proper way, inevitably a question that comes up is Kol Isha. If we have women at the table and they like to sing whatever it is, we're not singing Kariban Olam with them, that's not on the level yet, but if they want to start singing whatever inspirational songs it is that they're familiar, Hine Matovu Manayim or something like that, would Kol Isha be permitted in the context, or singing together, also Kol Isha, in the context of Kiruv?
To be matir Kol Isha in the context of Kiruv is definitely, besides, ultimately, I think it's detrimental to Kiruv. It's ultimately detrimental to Kiruv. But Rimatu Kol Isha is something that it's clearly, there's the issue of Kol Isha and what's being done. And it's mutter for Kiruv, Ein Aveira Mitzvah.
So that would be a resounding no.
No, a solid no. Again, I don't want to get, into the shitas of different poskim. If there's a crowd singing, mixed men and women singing together, if there's an Isa Kol Isha on that or not. The accepted psak is that there is. If someone has a posik, a reliable posik that paskins to him differently, that's not. I'm not getting into that. But the accepted psak, which unless you have otherwise that you could rely on, is that it's not a heter on Kol Isha. That's not a heter. Because the fact that it's a mixed crowd, everyone's singing together. Who knows if in practical terms, it doesn't make it worse. The togetherness of the men and women singing together, it can make it even worse. So I want to relate a story that happened to me over 40 years ago. It took place over 40 years ago. There was a boy learning in one of the about 45 years ago, maybe. I was learning one of the about Yeshivas in Yerushalayim. They were specifically in Rosh he was learning then. I used to host boys from Rosh on a regular basis, and this boy particularly used to come to us a lot. He used to come to us quite often. And we was quite close with him. He used to come. He was a boy who was on his way up, clearly on his way up. Before I get into it today, he's a Choshver Talmud Chacham, living in Yeshiva, living in Kiryat Sefer, and he's teaches, he learned. We were talking about some, but he was in the beginning of his way then, but he was already, he saw his direction he was going in he came from a very secular, Jewish secular family, an intellectual, family of intellectuals. This was before the age of feminism, but still it was an intellectual family. His mother was an intellectual, his father was some sort of scientist, I think a doctor or a scientist. The mother was also a very intelligent lady. And this was before Pesach says, could I have my mother come to you for the Seder together with me? So he said, of course. His mother was totally secular. I said, okay, no problem. The Seder in my house with my children that were younger children, but, it takes a long time. We finish eating all the kazesim like 10 minutes before Chatzos. And that Agada takes a long time. It usually involves divrei Torah. Different depends who the people there are, what type of divrei Torah is it. Not a lot of divrei Torah. In the Hilchos Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, in the concepts of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, and it goes on for hours. It's a long, naturally, this young man was very involved. He was what we would call a real Ben Aliyah, even though he was the beginning of his way. But this lady was sitting there. She didn't know what to do with herself. Then we gave the karpas. We tell him you have to eat less than the kazayas. Tiny drop. And we just keep talking. She's sitting there. She doesn't know what to do with herself. She finally, then she goes away from the table. I think she went to the bathroom to smoke.
And she took 3 hours, and you came back, and you were in the same place.
Right. She kept going and going, and this. She was a very refined person. She didn't say a word, but you saw this was like she was going out of her mind. This is crazy. This is wrong. It doesn't work. Anyway, we finished the Seder. She said, "Thanked us very much." We finished at 1:32 in the morning. Whatever the Seder with the Chazal Seder Pesach, and the boy was very happy. His mother was like. He said, what can we do? We feel very bad for him. That's what we spoke to ourselves. Through the years, from time to time, I would meet this younger man as he's growing greater and greater. But then just last year, I heard from my son, who heard from him. I want to tell you something about that Seder, about my mother. I have a sister who was at that time engaged and was getting married to a guy. And the wedding was imminent. She called up her daughter the next day. I hope it was after Yontif. I hope it was after Yontif. At least after Yontif Rishon, even though she's Yontif Sheni, but I'm sure she didn't wait that long. She tells her daughter, I was here for this Yontif, and I saw a totally different world. There's something else happening here. Before you get married to a guy, you have to come here. I have to talk to you. You can't marry a guy. I have to tell you. You have to come here. The daughter came. The engagement was broken. I think she married an Elfi Yid. That daughter has a daughter who's married to a Bentayr V'Tabchach.
Wow.
Now, we didn't accommodate this lady. We didn't accommodate her with anything.
And you didn't even get positive feedback at the time.
Right. But she saw something that she felt, this is authentic, this is real. This is something my son is involved in this, and this is real. This is a real world and it's meaningful. I'm not there, but it's meaningful. It's meaningful enough that we can't negate it. Right. I mean, this is not, it didn't come from a good feel. It's meant from, and most of my experiences are, I mean, you can't take a person who's sick and tell him, listen, you have to keep, in love and gati v'tayag mitzvah shamarti. You have to keep all tayag mitzvahs today. But the first thing is what we call show the Morosh of Torah. Open them up to see what Torah is. And when you see the light, when you see that Kehem Chayim, that Oira Torah, you want to attach to it. You want to relate to it. You want to become part of that. Mm-hmm. Each one has his own way. It's like there's different parts of the Torah. Each person has his chelik in Torah. But Hashivenu Avinu Sarasecha. Open them up, show him there's real meaning. Then he'll work his way to get closer.
Right.
He'll work his way. But it's not done by creating a good social atmosphere.
Right.
So naturally he has to feel good about you, that you're nice, that he likes to talk to you, you're a decent, fine human being. But it doesn't mean that you could interact with him on his level.
That you need to be flexible. It needs to be authentic.
Right.
Okay, so that's going to parlay into my next question. There are camps and Kiruv programs in particular during the summer months. And the summer is challenging because we have the 3 weeks. And then when you think you're relaxing a little, you get to the 9 days, and it gets stricter, and you get Shavua Shechalbo and then Tisha B'Av. So I understand that there are places out there, programs, camps, that are flexible in the minhagim of, for example, the 9 days. They allow swimming during the 9 days, or even a live concert and music during the 9 days. So how would we paskin on that?
Well, I'd allow them to make a siyum. If one of the leaders of the camp wants to make a siyum, and serve a gourmet fleishke meal, and by any means, and have, probably in the context of that meal singing, they could sing also that meal, and they'll cover the siyum. Music is more complicated already, but
not jumping in the pool.
Jumping in the pool.
Siyum's not going to help.
That siyum's not going to help with jumping in the pool. But again, the effectiveness, again, I would be, besides we don't say, tell a person you're allowed to do something that's not mutter, because this way you'll feel good, and therefore you'll feel good about the camp, and you'll connect to Judaism. It's meaningless. Again, people will bring me stories that this happened, and then a year later, because he felt good, he ended up going somewhere else, and he met somebody that really was makar for him. That could happen. But we're not... The Torah is not such that in order for the person to feel good, therefore, it is more of a chance that some Makarav will meet him and really do a good job with him. A year later, those are the Rebbeinu Shalom's cheshbainis. Those are the Rebbeinu Shalom's cheshbainis. We do what we have. We do what's right. But to say, this is going to help because it's going to create a more positive atmosphere for these kids, I doubt they'll find any serious. I doubt if Rav Elyashiv would have told me that was permissible. I more than doubt.
So the last question, and this is a pretty broad category, is When it comes to Kiruv, it's primarily rabbis, young rabbis that are doing Kiruv, and Kiruv is not only to be Makarev men, there are also non-observant women out there. And the question is, how does a Makarev, or it could be at work even, somebody's reaching out or thinking about reaching out to somebody who's a secular Jew, what are the sensitivities in a Makarev giving classes to men and women together, meeting one-on-one when a woman has questions, and all the various permutations of the interactions between the genders when it comes to Kiruv?
My first advice, a young person who's doing Kiruv, it's a couple doing Kiruv. And Chazal tell us, Avram Makarev Anoshim, Sarah Makarev Anoshim. They were the first Kiruv couple in history.
And the most successful.
Most successful one, right? They were the Kiruv couple. They were the original Makarev. Right? And it's not just, Avram Makarev Anoshim, because that's the way Kiruv. It's besides the effectiveness being that way, because the moment you have intergender Kiruv, inevitably other aspects come in, especially that for the person who's being niskarev, and even for the makarev, it's not just, I'm telling you, ask me a shayla what halach is. It's very involves the most deepest feelings of a person. It's very emotional. It's inevitable that it involves a relationship with the person. It involves a relationship. We know a relationship between a man and a woman which has an emotional aspect to it. I mean, since Avram Avinu, the person who says, Ata yadati kisha yifasmaratu, he says about his own wife, he was a person that till they came to Egypt, had to deal with Egypt, the beauty of Sarah, the physical beauty of Sarah was not, he never focused on it. He never focused on it because that's not the person he dealt with. That's he was beyond what we are. Again, it's not an advice for anyone to tell his wife, Ati dati kishi fasma. Till now, I didn't know. I don't advise it to anybody. But I don't know. But we're talking about Avram Avinu and Sarah Imenu.
They're in a different parsha.
They're different parsha. Avram Makarev is Anoshim. Because Kiruv, that's the way it's done right. It can't be done. It doesn't work the other way. So if we're talking on a more practical, first of all, someone who's involved in general, campus type of Kiruv, if people are involved in that, it always has to be a couple. With the focus on a more practical level of how to arrange it. Again, classes, to give a class, especially teaching Torah classes, not just a lecture. Torah classes in any way should never be mixed classes. Besides everything else, they are ineffective. They're not effective. They don't work well. I've had you like giving classes, it's not effective because the moment it's a mixed group, the focus of the listeners is not just on the lecture. Everyone's mind is
not on the lecture.
It's not on the lecture. How is she going to react? How is he going to react to what I asked, to what I said, to what this and now this? It's not there. And especially the lectures itself, the teaching of Torah itself, teaching men and teaching women in Torah are done in different ways and should be done in different ways. One is more true of Talmud Torah, one is true of Halacha and the spirit of the Divrei Torah. It's two different systems of how they should be taught, and no matter what the Maravinity thinks about that everything is equal. I mean, ultimately everything is equal, but it's different. The Rebbe created men with their mitzvahs and chiyuvim. The women have to do their mitzvahs and chiyuvim in their way, and the men in their way, and the Talmud Torah is also done in different ways. Clearly, it has to be done in different ways, and when you give a shiur or lecture for women, it has to be focused what's effective for the women. But a man giving a shiur for women, that sometimes is effective and could be more effective than a woman giving the shiur for women, and that definitely as a shiur is permissible. If it's on a campus with a couple, I would advise she should also be there by the shiur when he says the shiur for the women. She should be there. It would help that after the shiur, I mean, you can answer questions pertaining directly to the shiur, but a relationship being created as a result of the shiur will inevitably fall to her rather than to him. Right. So it would make things much easier. It's as if the relationship starts with the rabbi and the rebbitzin.
From the beginning.
Yeah.
Now, how about at the Shabbos table? When we have men, women, how do we handle those issues?
Again, I could tell you at my table, there's some. I mean, again, as a person who deals in the world in the yeshiva with yeshiva light mostly, usually people who invite bochum to the table don't invite girls at the same time they invite bochum. At our table, you have a lot of times bochum and girls at the table at the same time. But again, and we're not talking about Kiruv, we're talking about even not Kiruv. It's Sar Mekarev Sanoshim, Avon Mekarev Sanoshim. In other words, the conversations are not one big conversation. Naturally, if I say if you're tired at the table, if you're at the table, everybody listens. Sometimes a woman could ask a question. I'll answer it. But the social interaction at the table is kept separate. That's the Darkat Sneus which a Benteri should follow. Now, I'm not saying every table is structured that way, and a table that's structured, again, I wouldn't advise you have yeshiva bochum at the table when you do that. But if the people you deal with at the table is men and women, I would advise the etiquette of a man next to a woman, man, woman, man, woman, man is shalek halach, obviously. Right? It's not. I'm not about a couple sitting next to each other, but every woman between two men, every man between two women is doing something opposite of the halacha, clearly, right? But there are tables that the interaction is more. But again, to make it, if you at such a table, that should just be social interaction is not advisable. That's not what. If you have a table that the Divrei Torah spoken about, becomes the conversation about the concepts, ideas in the parasha and this. So you follow that. To let it become just a social event, a mixed social event, would be very detrimental at any Shabbos table.
Mm-hmm. Now, let me ask one final question back into the Kiruv context. What happens on campuses and other areas is even if you're being makarev as a couple, but there's a girl there and she lifts out her hand to shake, and as a Kiruv, you don't want to offend the person. So what would we say when something like that happens?
Kiruv is not a heter for a lav of leisikavu for shaking hands. It's not a heter, period. Now, there was, Kilos and Klal Yisrael, that in the context of meeting people, there were matter men shaking women's hands. There were, it's less prevalent today, that heter, because there's those communities, those kilos don't exist as separate kilos today. Those that are, according to their poskim, have that heter, and this is that type of handshake that goes into those heterim, according to their poskim. That's the heter. But saying that this should be also, had this not been in the context of Kiruv, we don't do it. But because it's Kiruv is mutter, it's like I've heard that it's not Kiruv, it's leisikavu. It's not Kiruv. It's creating the issue to other men and women touching each other is part of the issue of Leisikravu, and to say that this is not. Again, the Heter is saying this is not done as an expression of closeness of a relationship. That's, the common psak is that we don't do it. And this is Gemara's like that. We don't do it. If there are certain social circumstances that mikra din it's mutter, that's a question for Pesach the Paskin, not in the context of Kiruv.
So coming back to where we started from, the fact that it's Kiruv doesn't justify the...
No, and again, I'll repeat again, ultimately it was detrimental to the Kiruv.
Rabbi Schwartzman, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
Joining us now is Rabbi Daniel Travis, who is the Rosh Kollel of Kollel Toras Chaim in Yerushalayim. He is the author of over 20 Sfarim, including the popular Praying with Joy series, and he also wrote a fascinating sefer, very relevant for our conversation, called Takanas Hashavim, dealing with numerous halachic issues as it relates to Baalei Tshuva. In fact, that is the first of a planned 10 series on this issue. Rabbi Travis, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be speaking with you, and I'm a big fan of your Svarim as well, and it's really, I'm glad we had the chance to get together today.
So, Rabbi Travis, you get numerous shailas all about issues of chozrim b'tshuva, kiruv, etc. I just want to start a little bit broad and ask on a high level, how do you go about paskening a shaila in this realm? And in particular, I recently heard that there's something called a Heter Kiruv, and it sounded to me like there's a blanket concept that we're lenient when it comes to Baalei Tshuva and Kiruv, and I wanted to get your take on that.
I'd like to start with a story, and I've said the story over numerous times. It has to be said very carefully; that shouldn't be misunderstood. But the story of one of the big gedolim who once got a shaila on a chicken. It used to be that people didn't just purchase their chickens at the butcher; they bought a live chicken, they got it shechted, and sometimes there would be a question in the shchita. They would bring it to the Rav. So one time, an almana with 10 children, very very poor. A woman came to the Rav with her chicken, and the Talmidim were all there, and they realized that there were numerous opinions that were machmar on this particular shaila, and they were very, very skeptical and doubtful if the Rav was going to be mad to this chicken. The Rav looked at the chicken for a little while, and he said, "This is a kosher chicken." And the Talmidim were looking at the Rav a little astonished. They said, "What about the opinion of the Shach and the Taz and Rabbi Kiva Eger? There's numerous opinions here that forbid using this chicken." So the Rav replied, "The problem is that you're looking at the chicken and I'm looking at the lady." Now, I did not grow up religious. I went to public school. I went to actually the Bronx High School of Science, and I was training for the Olympics. I was doing many things in my younger years. And Rav Meir Kahana came to speak one time at our school, and he told us, "You're all in the wrong school. Go to Israel, go study Torah." That was 35 years ago. I listened to him, and I've been here ever since. And since then, it's always fascinated me, the idea of halacha, and especially as it relates to Baalei Tshuva. How do you deal with questions that have to do with Baalei Tshuva? So I think that story is a very, very important prototype for looking at all questions that are Kiruv related. There's no such thing as a Heter Kiruv. And there's, in general, the Sefer Toras Chatas, which was one of the 40 Svarim written by the Ramah, he writes there that there are stringent opinions and there are lenient opinions. In halacha is always determined, we say some of these opinions are accepted and some of them are not accepted. And some of them are called a chumrah and some of them are what's called ikar halacha. Now, if an opinion is not accepted, even in a case of kiruv, we won't be able to rely on that opinion. But sometimes there are opinions which are accepted, but the minhag, the custom of Klal Yisrael, is to be more stringent than that, right? So this is what the Rav meant in the chicken story. What the Rav meant to say is, it's true that Klal Yisrael accepted upon themselves many, numerous, stringent opinions in many areas of halacha, things that we do every single day. Some of them are stringencies. But in a case of need, then there's room to be lenient. And this is what Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach told me. He said, every case that deals with a Baal Tshuva, depending on how what stage the Baal Tshuva is in and where they are in their development. This is called the Tzar Gadol. This is called the Great Need. And we can rely on lenient opinions in this. But it doesn't mean that there's a Heter Kiruv. It means that the focus, the spectrum, halacha is not black and white. It's a spectrum. The word psak halacha, psak is the word cuts. The question is, where do you cut the line? For a Baal Tshuva, in the beginning of his development, we cut the line in a different place than somebody who's been religious many, many years. And this is how we have to deal with every single question. And this is how I deal with every single question. The first thing you have to know is who's asking the question. Where is he in his development? Who does this relate to? And then, only then, after looking at the lady, or looking at the Baal Tshuva, can we paskin the shayla.
So walk us through. We're going to analyze every shayla separately, and there was no blanket heter that we can be lenient across the board when it comes to Kiruv and Baalei Tshuva. So what are some of the leniencies that are built into the Piskei Halacha here?
Let me start with a very, very important klal, with a very important principle that really encompasses all the questions. If there was going to be a Heter Kiruv, which I don't believe there is, but this would be the closest thing to it. Rav Ruderman once made a fascinating statement. Rav Ruderman said that a Baal Tshuva writes his own Shulchan Aruch. What does that mean? That means is that it's impossible for a person to change overnight. A person does not go from 0 mitzvahs to Tariag mitzvahs. And things have to be taken on very, very slowly. So a Baal Tshuva, in the beginning of his development, he takes on one mitzvah, and then a second mitzvah, and then a third mitzvah. He takes on Shabbos, Kashrus, Taras and Shpacha. And for this reason, it's imperative that every single Baal Tshuva must have a Rav directing him. And this is a general principle. The college campus person has to have a Rav directing him. The person who's involved with a Kiruv camp, any time a person is involved with Baalei Tshuva, there must be a Rav who knows the person well and knows the halachas that deal with Baalei Tshuva well. So this is a very, very important principle. The Baal Tshuva writes his own Shulchan Aruch. He goes step by step by step. And I've even heard this. I heard it from one of the Gedolei poskim in Kiruv. He said that I tell people not to do things sometimes. They cannot, if they take on too early to do something, they may drop everything. And therefore, it's imperative that they go very, very slowly, taking on one thing at a time, and the Rav analyzes, are you ready to take this on? Are you ready to take this on? Are you ready to take this on? That's one very important. I call this, by the way, the 6th chelik of Shulchan Aruch. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach told me there's 5 chalakim, the 4 known chalakim, and the 5th chelik is called common sense, which is uncommon today. The 6th chelik, I say, is the Baal Tshuva Shailas. It's a special section of Shulchan Aruch that we deal with this. That's one idea. The second idea is something which my sefer, as you mentioned, is called the Kanas HaShavim. There's 2 places in the Gemara which mention special cases where Chazal were lenient for people who are coming to do tshuva, right? And that's regarding paying back ribbis. I once had a question of somebody who was involved in a loan corporation for 20 years. He had lent millions and millions of dollars out. He had acquired millions and millions of dollars lending money with ribbis. And many of those loans were to Jews. Does he have to pay back $5 million now? We're going to tell a guy as he's becoming interested in the Jewish religion. And the first thing we're going to tell him is, by the way, if you want to become a religious Jew, you have to write me a check now for $5 million. You have to start returning all the money.
It's a big entrance fee.
It's a big entrance fee. And most people are not going to take it, right? The answer is, Tekanas HaShavim tells us, you don't have to pay back the money. Now, again, every single question has to be taken to Rav. The Rishonim discuss the parameters of this. That's one case. Another case is by a thief. The Gemara tells a story about a thief, and he was thinking about doing tshuva. His wife said, honey, if you do tshuva, the belt on your pants you're going to have to give back because everything you own is stolen. So these are 2 cases. Again, the parameters have to be discussed with the Rav. There's a lot of dispute about this. But Tekanas HaShavim, this idea, we take it to other areas of halacha. And as we'll discuss today, different questions that each question has to be viewed vis-a-vis in this light of how do we apply Tekanas HaShavim to this area. And generally will mean accepting, we accept as long as a halacha, as an opinion in halacha is validated and has a place in halacha, we can utilize that depending on how the Rav evaluates it to paskin a shayla.
Okay, so the shayla that you mentioned is the person is looking back and he had a trade, he had a career, and it was something in Usr. But what do you do nowadays? When somebody comes to you younger, and he's in the middle of a trade. He has an occupation, and I've had shaylas. People have asked me about, I have a gambling business, or I have a lending business, and we lend to Jews also. Do we have to tell him, stop, you cannot continue in that? And that is really going to be possibly a deal killer for their being choser b'tshuva if we don't enable them to continue to earn a parnasa.
So Rav Moshe told me, Rav Moshe Sternbach, who is the head of the Heter Kiruv based in of Yerushalayim, and Rav Moshe Sternbach told me that the most careful a person has to be when passing shaylas is parnasa. Because again, if a person loses parnasa, then he's basically finished. He's not going to continue his tshuva process. And in fact, there's a former world championship middleweight boxing champion, Yuri Foreman. We learned together for a number of years together, preparing him for smicha. He was a professional boxer, and he came and asked me this question. And in my Sefer Tkanos HaShavim, the last shayla in the Sefer deals with this issue. Are you allowed, this is Siman Sadi Vav in the Sefer, Hamazik o chovo b'chavero ba'atzmo derech mitzchak o tachros, are you allowed to involve in boxing? And I came out, I analyzed the sugya very well, I looked at the Rishonim, and looked at the poskim, and I came out. It's permitted to box. Again, if a person has a choice to be a rabbi, a doctor, or a boxer, probably the first choice wouldn't be the boxer. Yeah, a person can get very serious head injuries, and it can affect him. But a Baal Tshuva who's already in the middle of his career, and he was very successful, he was the middleweight champion of the world for a while, you don't tell him to change his trade. A complicated question is, we got not long ago, a Kohen in medical school, right? A Kohen in medical school. What does he do? He's not allowed to touch corpses. A lot of the training requires touching dead bodies. What do you do? Going into hospitals where there are dead bodies? It's a very complicated issue, but it's important to know that a shayla must be asked. At times, it depends on the location. There are institutions today which are sensitive to these issues. They can deal with it, and you can get around it. A lot of places today are using plastic dummies instead of real dissections. A lot of times you can get into a hospital where these issues are less of a problem. Maybe you won't have to do residency in a hospital at all. There's, generally speaking, I've almost never found an issue which can't be solved. Right? There are issues where we have to wave the white flag and say we can't go further with this. But most issues can be dealt with, and especially when it comes to parnas issues. The Rav has to have a lot of the fifth chelik of Shulchan Aruch, a lot of common sense. Sometimes he has to be quiet, right? He has to know each point in the Baal Tshuva's development, when do you say something and when do you not say something. He has to know if he's ready to hear it or not.
Now, one important friction point is when a Baal Tshuva comes to you and a relative who hasn't been choser b'tshuva yet, it has a marriage. He's getting married. And, for example, his brother is getting married to a non-Jew. And this causes a lot of friction in the family, between his brother, his parents who are not observant. What advice do you give to someone when they're in that situation, or a close relative getting married, intermarrying, or reformed or conservative marriage?
Right. This is a very, very complicated question, and I'm going to refrain from answering this question. I'm just going to hint at this. Of course, a person must have a Rav, and the Rav should be very, very sensitive. He should realize all of the ramifications. He should realize what it means if a Baal Tshuva is cut off from his family, right? I recently had a shayla about a year ago about somebody who was a same-gender marriage, and the Baal Tshuva told me that if he doesn't go to the wedding, then his parents will cut him off. And this shayla was brought to Rav Auerbach, and Rav Auerbach says, you have to be cut off. You cannot go to a same-gender marriage. This is beyond the scope of anything acceptable. We cannot permit such a thing.
That was Rav Israel Auerbach?
Rav Israel Auerbach said that. Now, as far as a intermarriage goes, it's very, very complicated. A person must speak to his Rav. I'm not going to say any specifics about it, because I don't want to get myself into trouble. I don't want to get the Rabbanim who have empowered me to pass on these shaylas into trouble. Each shayla must be dealt with, but a person must know that there's not a black and white answer, right? I once went into a shul to speak, and the Rav saw me. He almost punched me in the nose. He said, did you write a tshuva in your sefer, which has a very distinct opinion about this question? And I said, I did, and then he almost threw me out of the shul for that. So you can surmise yourself. But
I guess you said mutter.
I won't say what I said. But the point is that every single shaila, it depends on the person asking the shaila. Moshe Sternbach told me that. He said, these shaylas will differ depending on the person. A chashav a rav to go to a wedding is very different than somebody who's just starting the tshuva process, who does not look like even that he's so committed to Judaism. Because if a rav goes to these types of weddings, it looks like he's confirming it. It looks like he's condoning it. It depends on the person. It depends on the severity. It depends on the family issues. All the factors must be taken into consideration, and that's why it's so important that a rav must be involved.
Now let me ask an easier question then. Including somebody who's starting the process of becoming frum, but he's not frum, maybe even still Machal Shabbos before Asiyah, in a minyan, or giving him an aliyah, or including him in a zimun, or when you have 10 in an Elokeinu. Where's the point where we can start including such a person?
So Rav Moshe Feinstein writes about this. He learns a very interesting source. We learned out the 10 rule for a minyan from the Meraglim, right? From the Meraglim, and says Rav Moshe, right? Although this is not such a clear issue, but Rav Moshe takes this on as that the Meraglim were apikorsim, right? So therefore, we see that even a verified apikoros, a bona fide apikoros, can be part of a minyan. In general, the rule is, which I've accepted from my Rabbanim, that there are dissenting opinions on this, but almost all the Jews today in Klal Yisrael who are not observant have the halachic status of tinik shenishba, which means that they're considered a shogeg. They're not considered purposely violating the Torah, which makes these halachas much, much more lenient. In almost all situations, will be lenient to include him in a minyan, in benching. I'll just tell you one story. I was by my third cousins here in Ramat Gan, and they're not religious, and they showed me this Haggadah Shel Pesach that they received from school, the Israeli secular education, and it was 4 pages. Everything was condensed, and for Dayenu, right, they had a 2-line version of Dayenu. It said, "Ilu nasan lanu es mamonim." If they had given us the money, "V'lo nasan lanu es HaTorah Dayenu," and not given us the Torah, that would be enough. In other words, in Israel, they're very, very scared of the religious population taking over. A lot of ramifications are taking place today, especially as we near the Israeli elections. A lot of things are happening, and they're fighting very, very hard. They means the establishment, whoever exactly they are, is fighting very, very hard to not let the religious take over, to influence and sway the people. Rav Israel Auerbach told me recently, he saw a statistic: 80% of the children of the last generation of non-religious are starting to be choser v'tshuva, are believing in Hashem more. They're starting to learn more, which is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful thing. They're wonderful organizations. I won't mention their names. There are many of them. They're wonderful organizations that are working with people today. I myself, we have a Kollel on a moshav in Yad Rambam, which there's 22, a group of 22 moshavim, encompassing 20,000 people. It's called Nishmas Kedoshim, separate program breakoff, and every day they learn in the morning together, and they go out on these 22 moshavim, and they speak to the youth there. Now, some of these youth, I myself were involved with, they don't know who Avram, Yitzchok, and Yaakov, and Moshe Rabbeinu are, and that's how far away they are, right? So these people, you cannot consider these to be deliberate sinners. You can't consider them apikoros or mummer or these status. They have this status of tinik shenishba, and therefore, in almost just about every single situation, we can include them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's go in that direction to talk about Kiruv Rechokim in general. We've been talking about Bali Tshuva, and when it comes to Kiruv, either in official Kiruv or unofficial, people doing it and having guests over, what's the most important thing that somebody needs to know?
I believe the most important factor in Kiruv is that you have to really be dedicated yourself and love what you're doing. Right? There's a story about my close friend, Rev Dovid Lichtenstein, who was on a plane, and he was sitting next to somebody who was from the cult of Harry Kay. He had a long ponytail. He was going to get pulled up by that. Little did he know he was going to get pulled down with that. But they were talking for a few hours. They exchanged phone numbers. And then a few days later, Rabbi Brizak gets a phone call from this young man. He said, "I want to become religious. I'm Jewish. I want to become religious." He said, "Why?" He said, "I see that you're happy. I also want to be happy." And this I heard from people who work in HaTorah. They told me there's something today called 2-minute Kiruv. That means just be nice to people. Just smile at them, say hello to them, be friendly to them, care about them. One of my students in the Kollel went through a program called Ner L'Elf, an excellent program which trains people to go to Chutz La'aretz. And the first question they asked him in the interview was, if you sat next to a non-religious person on the plane, what would you do? Would you give him a sermon, or would you just schmooze with him? And he said, I would just schmooze with him and make him feel good and make him feel like wonderful, like $1 million. They took him in the program. They said, that's the right answer. You can't treat people like mitzvah objects. People have to be people and valued and loved and cherished. And each and every Jew has a beautiful neshama. This is the most important, I believe, part of Kiruv, is to live with joy what you do.
Okay, now, doing Kiruv, a most effective method is to invite people over for Shabbos. So obviously we have a question of lifnei iver, because I'm going to invite them over, they're going to drive, or maybe they're going to come before Shabbos, and then they're going to head home on Shabbos. I can always offer them a place to stay, but in likelihood they're not going to stay, or they're going to want to come for lunch on Shabbos. How do we deal with that lifnei iver issue of my inviting somebody to come and causing them to drive to get to me?
So this question you brought up about lifnei iver, it doesn't just include Shabbos, it includes many areas, such as giving them food, and they won't make a bracha. I have to tell you a very, very important rule, which I heard from Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and I would understand the Aish also ruled like that. They said there's conflicting points in lifnei iver. There's one lifnei iver of him eating food without a bracha, but there's a second type of lifnei iver, which it means that if, let's say, a worker comes to my house to do some work, and he's not religious, and he asks me for a glass of water, and I say, I'm sorry, I can only give you a glass of water if you're going to first make a bracha. Now, often workers will do that in Israel, but sometimes they're not ready for that yet. Said Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and the Aish, the lifnei iver of disliking religious Jews is much worse than the lifnei iver of not keeping specific halachas. Because again, the goal is to make this person recognize and love Torah, and love Jews, and love Hashem, and love Klal Yisrael. Right? So therefore, again, that we're not espousing Reform Judaism or conservative or bending or changing or all these things, but within the framework of Torah observant Judaism, to get him to love Torah and love Hashem and love keeping the Torah. So therefore, said Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and the Aish, that you have to sometimes outweigh the lifnei iver that might be of not making a bracha and other areas for the lifnei iver of getting him not to like religious Jews. So that's one point. Now, regarding your specific shaila about inviting people for Shabbos, I have a Kabbalah from Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, which is that if you are an expert, he said a mumcha in Kiruv, then you're allowed to invite people for Shabbos, even if they perhaps might drive. You don't have to tell them to drive, but if they might drive, you're allowed to invite them. And the reason is simple. The Gemara tells us, Mutav l'chal Shabbos achas, lishmar Shabbos is harbi. The reason we're allowed to save people's lives on Shabbos is because it's better to violate one Shabbos so they can keep many Shabbosos. The same rule applies here. If you are a mumcha in Kiruv, now everyone has to know, a mumcha in Kiruv means that you have successfully transformed people from not being religious to being religious. It doesn't mean that you like having these Bali Tshuva for your house for Shabbos and you can tell them a few nice stories and give them kugel. That doesn't make you a mumcha in Kiruv. A mumcha is Kiruv is somebody like many of the people who work in Aish HaTorah or Sameach. They're trained in Kiruv and they're experienced in it. And it's very possible that by that one Shabbos meal that you'll make a major change on this person, and the next time you invite him, he'll say, I don't want to come on Shabbos to have to drive, I want to stay by your house. This is what Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach told me.
So if somebody's not a mumcha, then they shouldn't be inviting if they know people are going to be driving.
Rav Moshe Feinstein said that this is like mesis umadiach. It's a very serious avera to try to make a person by causing them to do averas. Again, I heard even from Rav Moshe Feinstein students, Talmidim, that if a person is very, very trained in Kiruv and he could make a difference, that potentially could have an effect. So a person has to know, just to invite the person over Shabbos because he'll have a good time, that's not enough of a reason to let him be Mechal Shabbos, because there are factors here that have to be considered. it's better for his neshama. It's very important for his neshama to keep Shabbos.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's move over to Campus Kiruv. Campus Kiruv is a fairly popular thing, but campuses, universities throughout the world are full of pretzas. It's not the best area for a good Jewish boy to be, or a good Jewish girl to be. A Rav to go on and do Kiruv. I used to personally teach a shiur for a Jewish Awareness Movement jam. It's at UCLA. And I used to go and teach that class, and I had to deal with the person who was in charge there that when a scantily dressed woman would attend the shiur, because there was a whole group, he would nicely come and invite her to another more appropriate group. And this was going back a couple decades, and I saw the challenges back then. I assume it's even worse nowadays. So how would we approach this hashkafically, halachically, in sending out or advising a Rav who's considering to do Campus Kiruv?
So again, I reiterate this very, very critical point. Anybody who's in Campus Kiruv must have a Rav, and he must be in constant contact with this Rav, because the shilas come up are very, very numerous, and the Yetzer is very, very cunning. Could get a person to do things, and for the sake of Kiruv, which we've heard many stories in the past few years, that very, very chashuv people have fallen in this area. So a person must have a Rav. That's point number one. Point number two is I believe that a person. I spoke this over once with the Novominsker Rav. He said this is not a yes or no question. A lot of this has to do with the person's personality. There are Rav Vogel, the former Mashgiach Zatzal of Lakewood, also said the same thing. He said there are people who just have difficulty setting boundaries. They might be wonderful people. They have difficulty setting boundaries, and they're going to get involved with relationships of opposite gender, and they just can't set boundaries, and it's not good for them to be involved with Campus Kiruv. Campus Kiruv is good for somebody who is disciplined. He can set boundaries. He's charismatic. He can draw people, but at the same time, he knows how to set boundaries. Chazal tell us, we learned by Sarah and Avram, they were successfully Makarav the entire world. Avram Avinu was Makarav all the men, and Sarah was Makarav all the women. Everyone knows, whoever read Men Are From Mars, men and women are different. They have different natures, they have different personalities, and men are much more successful with men, and women are much more successful with women. That's the best way to do it. But inevitably, a person of Al-Nakir is going to have people coming to their classes, the opposite gender. They have to know how to set boundaries. They have to have a Rav. They should be involved with serious Torah learning every single day. And these checks will give them the strength to be successful. I just want to mention, this Shabbos we had three girls from Sharim Seminary and 2 boys from Machon Shlomo Seminary at different meals by our house. And they both told us, I asked them all, how did you get to Sharim? How did you get to Machon Shlomo, 2 Kiruv yeshivas? They all said the same thing. There's a program now today. They offer 10 classes in college. They pay you $300. Not $200 is too little, $400 too much. $300. People go to these classes. They teach them about proofs of the Torah and Amunah and different things. And that I feel is an extremely successful way to do Kiruv. People are going to attend. I was asked recently a shaila about attending a frat party. Right? Well, that might make a person seem like very mu'uravim abrios, like very popular. It's not going to do it, right? This is a brilliant idea that, I don't know who came up with it, the Wolfson family, whoever did it, to pay people $300. One of these Bachram told me that of a group of 14 people, they had five Bali Tshuva and 2 Gerim came out of that. So that means a 50% success rate in their group. This, I think, is very, very effective. Look for ways that are real, and don't let the Yetzirah pull you to do things which could pull you down drastically.
Okay, give us some eitzahs. Let's move from the campus to the camp context. Kiruv in camp, and we have a camp that is being Makarev people at camp, and then the 9 days hits, and that would be a pretty big downer, apparently, for people who don't know what the 9 days is about, and all the restrictions, no swimming, no volitional swimming, music, live music. How do we handle that in the camp context? Is there a Heter Kiruv in that circumstance?
Again, that's the way we started. In my opinion, there's no such thing as a Heter Kiruv. The Rav has to be familiar with the circumstances. What type of kids are you dealing with? Are you dealing with kids who are just coming out of public school? And I speaking to students from where I went to school, and when I thought it was pretty bad when I was there, like it makes it look like what do they call it, a monastery now. What's going on? So you have to know who you're dealing with, what are the questions, and the Rav has to be asked. No question should be not asked. Nothing should be assumed to be usher, and nothing should be assumed to be mutter. Every situation has to be taken under consideration very carefully. Just you asked me now about the 9 days. Again, the 9 days, Avelis, it's not the place to start for a Baal Tshuva. Right? Welcome to the Jewish people. We're not showering, we're not swimming, we're wearing dirty clothes, and we're not shaving. This is not a good way to introduce people to the Jewish religion. I was asked about 2 years ago a question about making a barbecue during the 9 days in Gan Sacher. And I told him, I said, not serving meat, serve meat to these students, college students who are here in Israel. Don't start making them keep these halachas. But a barbecue, that's going too far. It's a chil Hashem for religious people to be making a barbecue during the 9 days in sight of everyone. Do things. That's very, very important rule. Also, when we're being lenient for Baalei Tshuva, it should be done privately. It shouldn't be done in public because that could be a chil Hashem. The person did not listen to me. He made a barbecue in Gan Sacher, and there were non-religious people there. They came up to him and says, "How dare you make a barbecue in the middle of the 9 days? Don't you care about the Beis HaMikdash?" And I told that to some Gedolim. They were very, very taken by that story. Don't cut corners. Follow what the Rav says, and you'll have true success. Right? Don't cut corners. Don't think that you're smarter than everyone else, because Das Torah means that the Torah has what to say on every single issue. As I say over many times, a beautiful statement from Rav Hirsch, Rav Shimfoil Hirsch. He said that theology is man's study of God, and Torah is God's study of man. The Torah knows completely every single facet and iota of the human personality, of the human psyche, and a true Talmud Chacham, a true Adam Gadol, can evaluate a situation, especially a complicated Kiruv question, and give you a good Eitzah, advice, how to follow. Don't start being smarter than everyone else. But, that I must say, I was once dealing with a very, very difficult question that had to do with a Kohen dating a young lady. And the Rav in question told me, if you are matter the Shaila, I'm going to break your nose, right? A very chashuv Rav. He said, I'm going to smash your face in. In the end, I was matter the Shaila, and the people who agreed with me, the Rabbanim agreed with me, were Rav Avad Yosef, Rav Moshe Sternbach, Rav Nissen Krelitz, and Rav Zem Nechemia Goldberg, amongst others. So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. A lot of people are afraid of how it sounds, how it looks. The rule is, don't be afraid. Every question should be asked. The Rav should be sensitive to the needs of the people who are being dealt with, right? And this particular couple did not get married, but it was a very interesting thing what happened. I wrote this tshuva up, and then later on it was found by somebody else who was in a similar situation, and that couple wound up getting married as a result. So you never know. You never know the results, and no question should be not asked. Every question should be asked and analyzed and taken with absolute seriousness.
Mm-hmm. Now, Rabbi Travis, there are hundreds of shilas, thousands of shilas in this area, and I'm sure Kiruv professionals, people doing Kiruv Baalei Tshuva, have questions for you. If they want to get in touch with you, how do they go about doing that?
So I'll give you my email. It's not it's not an unlisted email. I really appreciate getting these shilas because this is how I get my material for my future svarim. My email is dytravis, that's D like Daniel, Y like Yaakov Travis, T as in Tom, R as in Rabbi, A as in Apple, V as in Victor, I as in Ice Cream, S as in Shmuel, dytravis613 at gmail.com. And I very, very much appreciate these shilas. I take every single one with the greatest seriousness. And I always, whenever I write a tshuva, I'm in touch with at least 2 or 3 of the Gedolim, because I don't trust my own judgment yet. You know, I'm still in the growth stage. And I always like to hear the opinions of different Gedolim, and I get tremendous amount from being in touch with them and speaking with them. So I encourage, if people have shilas in these areas, doesn't matter what it is. I got a shilah recently about gender changes, and I've dealt with shilas about abortion and cryonics, about mummification. Even a shilah came up recently. You'd be surprised what's going on out there. Many, many questions. And my general rule is, the more people don't want to deal with it, the more that I want to deal with it. I like the nitty-gritty, and I'm my friend Yuri Foreman. I told him, like, for me, that's real halacha. People smashing each other's face in the boxing ring. That's like the getting your hands dirty with real halacha, and that's really what I live off of.
Rabbi Travis, this has been eye-opening. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you very much, and you should have much success in all endeavors.
Joining us now is Rabbi Yitzchok Feldheim. Rabbi Feldheim is a very popular lecturer who does Kiruv right now primarily on college campuses. If you name a campus, he's been there. But even much broader than that, he's been doing Kiruv literally for decades. Campuses, as a shul Rav for 15 years, outreach in the community and the like. So, Rabbi Feldheim, we are absolutely delighted that you're joining us today for this show.
Oh, thank you very much. It's always a chus to be on headlines. It's a chush of a crowd and a thoughtful crowd, and you have to really up your game for this audience. So I look forward to the discussion.
Okay, super. So, Rabbi Feldheim, you've seen a lot in your career in Kiruv, and we'd like to start off with the fundamental question, in addition to hearing about some of the more thorny experiences you have, on a more conceptual level, when things come up, and certainly challenges, halachic issues come up, do we try to find heterim, do we try to find kulas, or is that not advised when it comes to this context?
I don't think there's any makarim who are doing anything like a heter to break a halacha chas v'shalom, even the rabbanans. But it's more subtle things. It's like, can I invite someone to my house on Shabbos if he might drive? It's not a shayla of lifnei either. It's not even misayeh because it's not trey avadanare like the halacha. He can do it. He's going to drive anyway. He can go anywhere. It's more like a chil Hashem, being mezalzel and Shabbos. Issues like shaking a woman's hand if she puts it out to you, and if you don't shake, it's going to be uncomfortable. There are issues that are not mamish. The point of many poskim the mutter. At what point we don't normally do certain things, like a makarev who's a ben Torah, talking about secular culture with the students. Do I go to are we going there? So we take students to trips, and the students hang out in Ben Yehuda every night. Some Makarvim, they feel like it'll be a huge tale so they can sit with the students there. You can talk to them. Can you drink with students? Do you have a kumsitz? Can you play their songs? There's so many shilas. I don't think that Makarvim are asking to go mamish keneged halacha. There's no such that. But at what point can we look for heterim or kulas to what is normally the standard? Another example would be, I've done a number of debates with Reform and conservative rabbis to get access to their shuls and their kehillas. So these aren't things we normally do, So at what point does the Kiruv world given more room to maneuver? So is that sort of what you want me to look into, talk about?
Yes, correct,
okay.
Correct. And
Okay.
when hashkafically, and for example, when you'd ask shilas for a rav, have you seen that there's a propensity to be makel, or is there not such a propensity?
Right. The first thing is to answer any question like this, you really have to know what your goal is. You can't, you have to know what the goal is, what's your intent before you can figure out how to go about the problem. So I'm sure people get this. I don't need me to say it, but I think it's important that the whole reason for Kiruv is that the Rabbeinu Shalom is a native, and we have a chiyuv mahuracham afataracham. We have to be nistam l'bayri, and the Rabbeinu Shalom created the world behativ. And we're from Yidden, and Baruch Hashem, we have an unbelievable matana of Torah, and if we keep Torah, we live a beautiful life. And we'll marry off our children and have endless nachas and daris yisharim yivarach. Unfortunately, the rest of the world doesn't have this. They don't have a system that leads them to nachas and to joy and to satisfaction. I'm sure we realize how great our matana is. But when I look at go to college and I see college students, my hergish is nebuch. They're Jewish children, and they're going off a cliff. None of them will live the dreams they had when they were a child. There's no Bas Melechs anymore, and there are no more heroes in their world. And we do Kiruv because we want Jews to experience the Simchas HaChaim that Torah delivers. It's mamish hatzolos nefashos, and that it's not a din in the halacha of leisam al damrei echo, and he's my chefta shel mitzvah like a lulav and a dinim. It has to come from a zahergish, and when that's the hergish that I need this. There's so much tsar ahead of this person's life, and we have such beauty, and why shouldn't he be zeicha to what my children are zeicha to? So then I need to figure out how to bridge the gaps, and I could approach a Rav and a Pesach and Gedolim to ask them what can I do to not to make my life easier, but to save this person's neshama, to give him mitzvahs, to give him joy in this world and in the next world. That's my hakdama. That said, I want to make a list. There are a number of reasons to look for kulas and heterim, and a number of reasons not to. The first reason to look for heterim is if certain times you don't have access without it, just practically. Secondly, it's less about the access. It's just that they see us as weirdos. We're strange. We could be the Taliban. We could be just intriguing, but we're different, and they have no interest in being part of something different. To any degree that I can meet them on their turf, and I can find common ground, or talk their language, or do their thing, that'll help me bridge that gap and have access. The third one is the reason why you need heterim sometimes a kulos is because you're in situations where you have someone, they do things wrong, and they say something that's clear by the table, or come with a boy and a girl who are not married, and people will do things wrong, and you don't want to embarrass them. You don't want their experience when they finally came to be negative, and you'll never see them again. At what point am I allowed to look the other way? At what point am I allowed to let someone do something wrong? Somebody pulls out, by my Shabbos table, the cell phone rings. At what point do we tell everybody, don't say anything? At what point there's a different way we would behave with somebody who's from someone who's like this. You don't want his. Fourth is interesting, is that when the Makarev, more like in the Makarev, when the Makarev feels that he's so different than them, and he's not understood, not appreciated, so you're not on your game. If when you feel that the gap between you and him is so large, and you're on defensive, so you're not yourself. Sometimes the Makarev feels like you can meet them on the turf for his own path. So much of Kiruv is based on confidence and strength. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is that there are four good rationales to look for leniency.
I call it the practical. Right.
But
okay.
It can cause a slippery slope.
The reasons to look for kulas and heterim are important, and the reasons to avoid them are important. And you have to figure out the dance that's best for you. Here are my reasons not to. The first reason, interesting reason, is that in their world, they go to reform and conservative shuls. They know of them. They're used to wishy-washy people. They're used to people letting the law do whatever they wanted to do. They're coming to us because we mean something and we stand for something. To the degree that you are trying to accommodate them, sometimes you're losing the most important thing that we have. It's a world of relative morality. People have no real things, but people deep down, they know that there's something called truth. And so they're drawn to us because of the clarity that we have. And, I'm a very Schachter guy in Kiruv. So when one of my greatest tools is when you're talking in front of a big crowd and there's a loud-mouthed leftist. So and I'll say something. So their shtick that they do is they look at you and they say, "Oh my God, I can't believe you said that. I'm horrified that you would even say that. How dare you say that? That's racist, sexist, something is." But they want to put you on defensive. And the line is always, "I can't believe you just said that." And what normally happens is in the world is people fall over themselves backwards, apologizing and stuttering and stammering, and they're scared by that. And I look at them and I say, "You want me to say it? Should I say it louder and slower? What's the matter?" I'll say it again, louder and slower. It's the truth. And everyone in the room, I do this not because I want to pick a fight. And you don't usually get anywhere with the person you're fighting with. But everyone else in the room feels, wow, nobody ever stood up before. They're craving that. They're craving strength and confidence. The world is, when you talk like that, all the other people in the room perk up because they were also put off by these leftists, but they're intimidated by them. when the frum world starts to bend over backwards too much, so we're one more victim and one more possible hero failed the people. The people are looking for someone to come in strong. And there's nothing like it in Torah. You know, I tell Kiruv guys, you should always, like, before you give a share, you have to be learning Be'in, like something. Because the fire in your eyes after learning Torah, that's the greatest tool you have. They need to see you coming in with this fiery confidence. That's what students need to see. Okay, so that's my first argument. That again, practically, if you're too strong, you're not going to get to see anybody. So those reasons for attainment still exist, but you have to weigh them against. You have to be totally sensitive to the appeal and the importance of clarity and non-compromising truth. It doesn't exist in the world, and it blows people's mind. They need it and they crave it. Truth is the deepest human need. The second one is you know, when Moshe looks out at Klal Yisrael, it says Vayar b'Sivloisam. He sees their pain, their stuff, what they're enduring. There are a lot of words for pain in Yiddishkeit. You could have said Ino, you could have said Tsar. What's the chiddush of Vayar b'Sivloisam? Because it's describing empathy or sympathy. But when I sympathize on someone, I see his pain. So I'm the Racham and he's the victim, and he's a Nebuch. I'm saying, ow, oi, Nebuch. Vayar b'Sivloisam is a whole, it's also empathy and sympathy, but it's so much deeper. What I'm saying is, I see what you're dealing with. Wow, what a gibber you are. Instead of saying, ow, you're saying, wow. You're empowering the person. You're making the person feel, that's the secret of Moshe's godless, is that he became the manik, not because he was a Racham. He was an empowering Racham. Many Rachams, they emasculate people. They make you into a victim. A leader looks at you and says, wow, I can't believe what you're coping with. So when I have people and I give them heterim, and I'm sort of creating a victimhood, and I'm training them that Yiddishkeit, that we're going to meet you. And when I get a student and I let him rise to the challenge, I say, don't worry, come with me, you can do this. I'm going to hold your hand. So then I'm allowing him to feel proud of himself rather than to feel like a victim. One of the greatest tools you have is helping students rise to challenges, like cajoling the person, Taka, sleep over by my house, don't drive. When you force the guy to sleep over by your house and not driving, it might be very hard, but that changes him. He kept his first Shabbos. He feels like a different person. When I let him drive, he goes, I have a sweet, tolerant, loving rabbi. When I make him sleep over, he goes, wow, I'm much stronger than I thought I was. And it's more important that he likes himself than he likes you. So that's point number 2. Point number 3 is practical. Is coolest, get in the way of your family and your kahila. You don't want to mix up your kids. You know, if you're a college makarev and you're on campus, it's less of a problem. But if you're having people in your house, if you're a balabas inviting coworkers, so you have to know what your kids can deal with, what your kids are capable of. You have to know what your kahila can tolerate. If you're living in a cul-de-sac in Lakewood, maybe you shouldn't have people driving in. It's a good thing, you know, but not everyone's holding there, and you don't need to rock the boat. There's limited battles. The idea is that your children are your priority. Kiruv is an extra. You can pour out from your pitcher after your pitcher's full, but don't empty your pitcher. Let your pitcher overflow. Don't pour from it. You cannot do Kiruv at the expense of your kids. So sometimes bringing heterim and kulas that your students need, your kids or your kahila can't deal with. And that's, first you have to circle your wagons and protect the core before we can go out and expand. It also helps better when the core is strong. A happy house of not mixed up people is the greatest Kiruv tool. Okay, and the last one is sort of like the reverse of what I said in other things, is that the makarev, when he doesn't do kulas and he's firm and he's ma'aser nefesh, he feels stronger and he feels more powerful and he's on his game. And it sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes I feel alienated from the students and I'm a defensive. But sometimes an unwavering approach makes you feel like a Kodesh Baruch Hu is mamish be mincha, you know, and he's there and you're fighting the war with him. And that's again, so much of real world life is psychology, is how you feel about yourself. A good chumrah, always in life, a chumrah that might be unnecessary makes you feel more none sometimes. Hashkafali, is that the point of it? I don't know, but sometimes the benefit of chumrah is that I feel close to Hashem and I get all the benefits of being closer, and I'm more effective. I learn better, I daven better. So there are reasons against it, and besides, of course, the main reason is the slippery slope that a lot of these things create these things. So those are the pros and the cons.
Right. Now, let me ask you, do you think success in Kiruv is dependent on finding Heterim or Kulas? Because I have heard people with a real hashkafic approach of we need to be Mekel, and we're only going to be successful if we can make Kiruv, make Judaism, quote-unquote, more attractive by showing how exciting it is, and they believe that that requires finding Heterim.
Right. Once you understand that there are milas and chesronos and risks and benefits, and it's every situation, every makarev. These aren't really shilas, I don't think, for poskim. For a dayan, a place. A dayan, most of the things I'm talking about are not halacha shilas. They're all like things that you need a manik, a gadol, someone who sees the whole picture and gets the whole thing. And makaravim shouldn't be scared. These are the things you bother a manik and a gadol for. You don't need to go to your shul rav to ask your silas. You can go to the top. These are some of the most important things in Klal Yisrael. You can pick up the phone. You can call Lopyansky. You can call big people who understand the world of America and know Torah, and because it's so individual, and you need someone who knows you too. Listen, there are things I did. There are things that I did at certain points in my life that maybe now I wouldn't do, but I'm not ashamed I did them. I feel like, I'll give you an example. We were on a trip with students, and again, it's not halacha, but you'll hear an example. There's one kid on the trip who was everyone was giving him cup because he was a big rapper. He rapped. He was a rapper, and I was yeshiva. I'm a creative guy. I used to write ramen, And the endless is that yeshiva were much more demanding. A rapper just has to rhyme things nicely. In grammar, you got to be very sharp and very good. So I figured if I could do grammar, I could rap. So I challenged this guy. He was sitting there by a campfire we're in Costa Rica on an Aish trip with 50 students, and I challenged him to a rap battle. I'll tell you, I was kind of students more like that than I did in any shir that I gave on that trip. That allowed them to listen to my shir in a way that they never would have listened to. Is it a zilzul for a ben Torah to do rap? I don't know. Is that included in what you're calling kulas and heterim? I think in the world of Torah, our chitzonis and our stuff is the sugyas of heterim and kulas. This is what we're talking about. These are real things. The way I come to I thought about these things, and that's to a degree I still think of them today, is it depends on what you are. I was able to do this and not be ashamed of myself because I wore a suit and a tie on every trip. I never wore shirts or flip-flops. I was the rabbi always with in Costa Rica. I was always there with the suit and the tie. That was my thing. Maybe I left my tie open so I can come a little not so stiff, but I always had a tie open with a suit on. So because I first established a posture with them as a certain level of respectability, so it was safe for me in my mind to do something like this and then get away with it. And it wasn't that I resolved on myself.
So that's a getter that you establish, and I think that's a good entree into what I wanted to ask you next is the general risks of doing campus Kiruv. You're on a campus, men, women, boys, girls, not the most tznius environment. Dafka, the hefech of that is really the opposite of what's going on and the promiscuity, etc. What are the risks of going onto campus, living on a campus, being on a campus, interacting with students, girls, boys, etc.? Walk us through what the risks are and what are some of the pitfalls that have been encountered by Kiruv professionals doing campus Kiruv.
Good. So let me say, this is important. I first want to say like this. A lot of people go into Kiruv. It's like I put on the blue shirt because they wanted me to. Some people put on the blue shirt actually because it helps them do Kiruv. And some people put on the blue shirt because they really wanted to always wear the blue shirt. It's like people say about Purim, that you dress up as what you always really wanted to be. So that's what you got to know. A lot of the stories you're going to hear about a Makarev in danger, it's not usually at the college brought him into danger. He went in ready, often with the feeling that this is the world. He's nispal from this world, and listen. So many from people think that their world is so cool. Like we feel like like a lot of people feel like we're being moiser nefesh that we don't have the simchas Chaim they have. It's the biggest mistake. Like the only people who think they're having fun are from people. I spoke to Hasidim on Mittelnacht last year. This is what I told them. I said, the only people who think that the Goyim are having a party are Haimishians. The people, but the people think that. And if you're going into Kiruv out of a respect or jealousy or even being intrigued by them, you're already in the Mokum Hezek. You have to go in there loving your life, proud of your life, and feeling like you're the lifeguard. And because you're not going in the pool to swim. You're going in the pool to schlep them out. If you're going in the pool to swim, then you shouldn't be there. You shouldn't be there. And that's the most important line. Now, I'm not saying that you can go into something with good intentions and not fall. But that's a slippery slope. That's why you have to create a buffer zone, not to talk to women one-on-one, Definitely not. We never went, like, again, the issue of drinking with students, that's a big sugya. Some people are very miser in that, and some people, that's their whole Kiruv effort, unfortunately, But what we did was, and again, I don't know, it's different people. I just know when we went on our Aish HaTorah trips to Eretz Yisrael, so again, every Makar is different. My mahalach was the students begged us to go with them. They would go every night afterwards to Ben Yehuda and sit and drink, and they would beg us. And we had a policy that, what we did? The last night of the trip, they would go and we would come down to like an hour into their thing and stay for half an hour with them. And we made a big deal out of it. We came, we sat down with them. It was outside on a big table, and they felt like they told them, "Oh, these are our rabbis." Should we have done it? I don't know. But the point is that we're going back to campus after a trip. You want it to carry over, and you need to create that feeling like they're your people. You need to give them the chance to take their selfies with the rabbi that they can send all their friends. Once they send their friends selfies of their rabbi, then you're part of their lives. They took you out of the closet, and now they're yours the rest of the semester. So that was, we didn't go drink with them. We drank with them. The last night of the trip, we came after them and left before them. That's the mahalach, Again, would I advocate that for everybody? There are some people that shouldn't be near it. There are some people who do much more than that, and they're very from Yidden, and I'm jealous of how good they are with their students, and I don't go to sleep worrying if they're doing anything wrong, because I know they're ruchnius, and they're just cooler people than I am, and more geschmack, and they can do it. I feel awkward in the bar. I don't know how to do that scene. I like to give a share and talk these things. It's not my place, but some people are great at that. So
right.
Yeah.
So let me ask you one final question. You have a lot of experience. You've been doing this for a long time. What are some of the best, the most unique or interesting questions or issues that have come up to you?
Okay, good. So let me show you one beautiful thing that struck me. Baruch Hashem happened early in my Kiruv, so it helped me come a little bit out of a certain defensiveness that I have. Like is one in the forefront, the originators of Kiruv in America, Rabbi Mintz from Staten Island, the Mashkiach of Staten Island Yeshiva. His son founded Ura. He founded Ura, but his son runs Ura, lead Ura to the whole thing it is. So he I don't know if it's like to what degree, like it's, but whatever. This is what everyone says. The story we heard, I grew up with, was that he used to go around Staten Island on Hanukkah looking for electric menorahs, and when that meant it was a Friday, he would go knock on their doors. And he would say, "So you have children? What would it take to get your kid into a Jewish school? Let me help. If you need money, I'll get the money." And he went around and he got unbelievable amount of people from because he went around looking at me. So I grew up hearing this, and it's a very gutsy thing to do. But I said, you know what? I had a shuttif, whatever, a guy who worked with me in Yadi, Zoid Halper, and the whole Chosh of Yid, Talmud Chacham, and he said, let's do this. And I said, oh, great idea, let's do it. So we went around together looking for menorahs on Hanukkah. And every door we knocked on, we bought dreidels and stuff and chocolate coins, and the women would open the door, say, "Oh wow, so nice." They would stick out their hand, and we would thumper, and we would do hezek instead of everything we wanted to accomplish. They would make the whole thing awkward. So I'm a good talker, so I talk my way out of it. You have all these different lines till something works. But Lamaisa, the whole point was the milas. So I called Rabbi Halper and called Rabbi Mintz. And he asked Rabbi Mintz, you're doing this for years. You must have found a workaround. Like, what did you do? Rabbi Mintz is mashkiach of Staten Island Yeshiva, Talmud Chacham, really Yerushalayim, and mashkiach. And what Rabbi Mintz says, I shake their hand. So we were floored. For us, it was. We're coming from, we're doing Kiruv. We felt our hands tied, and he literally hands tied, and he gave us this Heter, and he's not a nobody would ever say he's a Kal in any sense of the word. He says, this is Moshe's psak, and this is what he heard from Reuven, and so we did that. So that was a watershed moment for me. And of course, he wouldn't be mouthed at that in everything. I'll give you another example of that. I was asked to do a debate. I used to do a lot of debates, and then one Reform conservative rabbis, so people asked me, how do you do it? I said, if you makbid to win big, then you can do it. You're not going to be Kol Isha. It's only going to be good. So that was my chumrah. I have a chumrah. I have to win. But one time. Malkiel called me up, and somebody brought a flyer from a debate I was doing in Philadelphia to Lakewood, and he said, "You can't do this." And I understood. If he calls man, you're doing Kiruv out in the world, you're not there. It's one thing, but when you got back into the Yeshiva and you're representing the Yeshiva, I didn't want it to get back, but when it got back, you're doing hezek. You're doing it. The oil HaTorah has to have real chaimis. And the secret is people don't realize it. If you have big chaimis, then you can be very generous to the people out in the field. You'd be surprised on the coolest that the most Haredish people allow you to do, as long as you're not doing it in Lakewood or in Satmar or wherever you are. The bigger, the more from and safe your community is, the more leeway you have when you're outside. But when you come back into the community and you're now, it's going to be brought here, so then it becomes usher. So I went to Kiruv. I said I can't put the flyers already went out. I got a Heter from Shmuel, told me I could do it, and I asked him first, and he said yeah, but everyone knows now. In the end, I got a sensitivity to the Yeshiva, to the concerns of the Olam HaTorah. At the same time, I understood the Kiruv, and they let me do it, But I didn't know why they had to. I understood this tzad very well, and I'm very careful, Then I wasn't living in Lakewood. Then I was living in Pennsylvania. Now I'm living in Lakewood. I wouldn't do a public debate anymore against the Freiheit because I live in Lakewood. If I was living out of town again, I thought I could do it under the table. I would do it again. I just got a shayla. I was about a Product Inspire convention. There's a woman, whatever, she's been coming for many years. She comes to all my shiur and we talk afterwards. And she's a tough situation. Here's what she asked me. And I know my answer to the psak is so far is to duck. sometimes I'm even embarrassed to ask. I don't even know. But she has a son. A daughter. She has a daughter who's now a son. She hasn't had actual surgery, but she's taking hormones, and she grew hair, and her muscle structure has changed. She looks like a man, and she's an unbelievable mother. I've discussed her over the years through the whole process of not to throw her out, and the girl was angry. Someone must go through tough stuff to get here. They're Achmanis, and so she was an unbelievable mother. She was growing her own ruchnias, and she's a frum lady, and her daughter's there. So she says, my daughter for the first time is appreciative of how I respected her and how she likes how I've become from, and she's asking me questions, and she wants to do Jewish things with me now. And I don't know, can I bring her to shul? Where's she going to sit? And more important,
and it's a him. It was a her, and now it's kind of a him.
Now it's kind of him. So I don't know. My inclination is that the men, if the men think she's a man, so then they should sit with the men. It's a din. I don't know. But the bigger shayla that she had is not even, because she might not be up to her coming to shul, and she could avoid that. Like the shul, it's not necessarily the place for her to start her ruchnius anyway. But Shabbos meals, can she bring her to people's houses? Can she invite people? Because the men will invariably reach their hand out to her to shake her hand, and she's causing people to do things without letting them have a choice. And this was her child to me. This is the new world.
It's is there a Kol Isha here?
Kol Isha, all these things, And I've dealt with all the regular shilas. This is new. For years, I've met mamzerim. I've met Jewish boys dating a Mitzri. So these are real halacha shilas. Over the years that have come up, but these are new shilas, and they're.
This is new. Wow.
Hey,
so who do you typically ask these shilas to?
So right now, Baruch Hashem, since I'm adding the Kehillah, so I basically I'm just a Maggid Shir. I spend my time. So again, I'm not even so much on campuses now. Actually doing most of my work the last Kufa has been with Frum Yeshiva Light and Balabatim, who have developed Emunah questions. That's my new thing. But I still go to campuses, and when I go to campus, the campus guy he's the Balabas. I'm just a Maggid Shir. So I say, the student asks me this kasha, Tzaddik, it's your lucky day. Go deal with it. I'm going home. That's what I do now. I don't have. This woman, it was actually, I know her for years, so I'm going to have to ultimately answer this question. I know who I'll call. Maybe I'll just listen to your show and you'll ask one of the other rabbis to come on.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll cover this one, but
I don't know. Who would I go to? I would listen. It's also just for people out there. This is a great opportunity to develop a kesher with the gadol. You get questions like this, and I would go ask. I'm going to ask. Maybe I'll ask everybody. You get to talk to people. You get to have their time and see how they think. This is Shemesh Tamid Chacham, and you'll see that people will have time for you when you're talking about Klal Yisrael. The Avos Yisrael of Agadolim is paramount, and they'll make all the time in the world for you. I also encourage everybody out there who's hearing this. The best Kiruv people are Balabatim. The college Makaravim were rabbis. There's nothing like, you don't need Heterim and Kulas when you're an accountant or a lawyer. You already bridged the gap. The Heterim and the Kulas are for the college Makaravim. All of you out there, you can go, you can invite them to your house, and instantly they'll feel like you negate to them, and they'll see all the beauty of your Shabbos table, and you'll just by nature of being happy from people, you'll change people's lives every Shabbos. Don't be scared.
Very nice.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, Rabbi Feldheim. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Kol Tov.
I am delighted to have Rabbi Shlomo Elkan join us. Rabbi Elkan is the founder and director of the Chabad at Oberlin College, which is a small liberal arts college approximately an hour from Cleveland, and 30% of its student body is Jewish. Rabbi Elkan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be able to join you and speak with you.
So, Rabbi Elkan, I'd like to first get a little bit background about you, about your upbringing, and then how did you go about founding the Chabad at Oberlin? How did you find Oberlin, and then how did you go about founding a Chabad there?
Sure. So, many layers of Hashgacha Pratis got us to Oberlin, but myself, I actually did not grow up in the Chabad movement. I came to it later on. Towards the end of high school, started really getting involved and got exposed, and then met many Rabbanim from various different places in Atlanta, where I grew up. And I'm from New York originally, but really grew up in Atlanta, and also got exposed to Chabad. A friend of mine brought me to a Chabad house, and really took it from there, enjoyed the learning and the sitting and spending a lot of time in the Chabad house, seeing everything that happens there, sitting at the dining room table, learning, watching the interactions between a husband and wife, the shliach and the shlucha, the parents and the children, and then move that into going to yeshiva for various different times, for various Lents, and was actually working in the professional field for a while, and got involved with Hillel, the campus organization. And my wife and I had always had an open home and had college students and others at our Shabbos table. But through Hillel, kind of in an interesting way, got us to a shlichus, where we realized that our best talents that Eibishter gave us would best be used in this way, and to share our knowledge and everything that we've amassed, and to be able to learn and grow with college students, and eventually turn that into a shlichus. And how we got to Oberlin was we were looking for campuses, and we met with the head shliach, the shluchim in Cleveland, Ohio, about a different campus actually. And as we were speaking, the rabbi said, there's this other campus that I think you guys might do really well at, which we'd never heard of. And we Googled it, read the Wikipedia articles. 2 weeks later, came for a visit to basically try to find a place to rent to move here. And a week after that, that was the Sunday right after Shabbat Shuvah, and we moved here 2 days before Sukkot. And that was 10 years ago, and we've been here ever since.
So how was it starting off from scratch, and how do you compare it to how it is today?
Oh, wow. The interesting thing, I think, about shlichus in general and probably campus shlichus, because there's a turnover of students every year, every semester even, is some days you can feel like the king of the campus, and then the next day or even an hour later, you're reminded sometimes that you're the bottom of the barrel, so to speak. But
everyone leaves. Everyone graduates and they're gone, and you have to start from scratch.
Yeah, or faculty turns over and you create relationships, and those are gone, and you have to start over again. But that's only one side of it. I mean, obviously, when we first came here, we'd walk around pushing when we first moved here, we had 2 small children. We pushed them in the stroller, walking around campus, and we would meet Jewish students, and they would approach us or we would approach them, and we would invite them to come over. And we would have a good Shabbos would be, 1, 2, 3 students sitting around the Shabbos table. Now, we can have 50, 60, 70, up to 100 students on a regular Shabbos at Chabad House.
How does your wife, I assume your wife does the cooking, how does that happen?
So we share in it. She does the lion's share of the work, that's for sure. But she plans, certain things happen on Tuesday night, certain things happen on Wednesday night, certain things happen on Thursday night. Also Thursday night, one of our staple pu'ulas of the Chabad House, we call it Shabbos Angels, where a handful of students come over every Thursday night and they help in the cooking. So it's also builds the relationship. It's informal time together. You get to talk about all kinds of things going on with their life, in Yanim and Kashrus, in Yanim of Yiddishkeit in general, and they're around the house. They see the family, they see the children, they're involved in a kosher kitchen. So a lot of these things come up, and then they also are actually helping. They're making the challah, they're chopping the salads, they're, whatever it might be, and they get to learn all of these various things at the same time.
Now, do you stand on campus asking, are you Jewish? Because when I was teaching at UCLA for a Kiruv organization, and that's what they used to do, is they used to stand on Brewer Walk and approach students and say, are you Jewish? And that was the initiation of the contact. So how do you go about doing that?
Right. So, good old-fashioned Miftzayim, pounding the pavement, we definitely do that. But we also... I reap a certain benefit of being at a small campus. There's less than 3,000 students at the whole school. So you kind of start to know everybody pretty quickly also. So there are times when, let's say it's Hanukkah or before Hanukkah, and I'm giving out menorah kits. I don't ask them if they're Jewish. I know who they are, and I say, here, Josh, take a menorah, or here, have matzah, or come shake lulav, or whatever it might be. Other people, as we're talking, I'll ask them if they're Jewish, and then sometimes, if it's Sukkot and we're standing out next to the Sukkah with the lulav and esrog, we'll say, hey, as a group of people walk by, are any of you guys Jewish? Most people are pretty, you get all kinds of interesting answers, but most people are willing to engage, and because now we've been on campus for so long, we're a known entity. It's very different today than it was 10 years ago when we first came here. And I think in general, even just Chabad being as ubiquitous on campuses and around the world, even in these 10 years, has really changed. So people engage with us in a very different and generally more open way.
Right. Now I've seen different organizations when they're going out to the students, they feel the need to maybe speak to them on their own level and get involved in activities that they think will be attractive to the students, which may be philosophically or halachically against what would be acceptable in Judaism. Now, I did go on your website, and I saw the activities that you're involved in: challah baking, menorah lighting, putting tefillin on the guys, havdalah. What's been your take on what type of activities are more attractive or less attractive to the secular Jews on campuses?
Yeah, and I can only speak from my experience, and others might have different ones or feel differently about it. But number one, I think our whole idea is to be very authentic, and when we're meeting students, it really is it's a wholesome relationship. It's not just about and a holistic relationship. It's not just about putting on the tefillin or lighting the Shabbos candles. Of course, the more mitzvahs in the world and they're adding, this is bringing us closer to Mashiach, and that's the whole point. But we care about the person. So we're very authentic with them, and we build a real relationship with them. So that's number one. Number two, in terms of programming, if a college kid wants to party, they probably can party better without the rabbi than with the rabbi. And,
sure. He doesn't want the rabbi.
Right. And, if that's what they're looking for, that's not where we need to be. And we need to, I often say when my wife and I speak, and, the Rebbe sent us here to be a stick in the mud, not to become the mud. And it's very important to hold very dear and very true to our values and what we're here to represent. And I think that goes a long way with the students. Now, at the same time, we try to be very accessible, and we try to be available to them, and we try to be very relatable to them, as best as, a guy who's however many years older with 7 kids could be to them, to a 19-year-old college kid. But we're real to them, but we're not trying to be a college student, and we're not trying to attract them with what more of the same. Like, one of the fundamental questions we always ask our student leadership of our Chabad student club is, what's authentically Jewish about this? Or what is Chabad bringing to the table to this event that no other group on campus can do? So whether it's a tzedek, social action, community service type of program, or something else, like what's unique that Chabad's doing, that if somebody who didn't know anything would look at this and know that this was a Jewish organization doing Jewish things. And that to us is very, very important and differentiates us. And when students really authentically want to connect with their own Yiddishkeit, they aren't confused then by the messaging that they're getting.
Mm-hmm. Now, as you're in touch with when you're in touch with other shlichim on other campuses, would you say they take the same approach? Because this is obviously a different approach than the Hillel would take, or maybe other organizations that try to reel in the students with things that are more secular. This is a very different approach that I'm hearing.
Right. Look, I think that is the fundamental essence of Chabad programming in general. But every shliach couple, set of shluchim, will, they have their own approaches and their own flavors, and every campus also has its own persona and what works and doesn't. I believe, I would like to believe certainly, that none of my colleagues and fellow shluchim are selling themselves out, so to speak, and doing something that would be inappropriate. And when you look really at most campus Chabad houses, Shabbos is a Shabbos meals and minyanim are a pillar. Sinai Scholars, which is a learning program, is a pillar. Those are the things that really hold up the Chabad house, and so I think that is universal to all of us, and that's ultimately really what's attracting people into Chabad houses across the country and across the world.
Right. Now this show is about Heter Kiruv, and when can we be flexible or not flexible in halacha. When have you found issues that arise that are challenging to you halachically, hashkafically? For example, sitting at the Shabbos table and you have cell phones ringing and your kids are there. Where have you found the conflicts to be over the past 10 years?
Sure. I mean, part of it is just what our sensibilities are and what we're used to, and certainly having cell phones at the Shabbos table, it's not happening when you're sitting in Crown Heights or Borough Park or whatever. It's not the norm in a frum community, things like that. and we address it. We have students that do Shabbos announcements every week, and it's what's coming up for the week to come in terms of programming. And the last announcement they give every Shabbos is, here, be present here with each other, engage with the people around you, and in honor of Shabbos, please stay off of your cell phones. Does that mean that a cell phone never comes out of my Shabbos table? I would be naive to tell you that were the case. Part of the challenge, probably the biggest challenge, is the chinuch in our children, right? And explaining how, just because these precious Yidden are doing things that are things that we don't do, how we still have the Avos Yisrael, how we still welcome in them, how we don't judge them, but how we're also here to educate and learn together on how they can engage with Shabbos, Kashrus, and all of the other mitzvahs that would apply. We also deal with things things on college campuses and in the world are becoming more and more prevalent, people with gender identity, things like that. And we speak very openly and honestly and lovingly with students, and we're very clear where lines are. I think also a personal commitment that we have in our Chabad house is we would never put anything out there, whether it's food or a topic or something else, that we ourselves are not comfortable with. So I would never, chas v'shalom, serve somebody something that doesn't meet the standard of kashrus that I personally keep. If I won't put it in my mouth, I won't put it in yours. So we maintain a very strict, adherence to halacha, to what we know and what we understand. We also understand that not everybody knows to do this, and it's an educational opportunity for us to talk about these things. And sure, your kids see things, and you have to have conversations with kids. And I think in this day and age, in 2020, kids even in Borough Park and Mea Sharim are exposed to things. We might be having these conversations with our kids a little bit earlier, and it requires myself and my wife to be on the same page and to be very communicative to our own children as well.
And talking about your kids, Oberlin is in the middle of nowhere. So How do you educate them? Are the yeshivas? Are they from schools around there? How have you handled that challenge?
Right. So the next Shomer Shabbos is about 55 miles away from me. When we first moved on Shlichus, we were going to Cleveland every day, twice a day. I would go drop them off in the morning. My wife would go pick them up in the afternoon. So we were doing about 1,000 miles. We were doing about 1,000 miles a week on the car. So my mechanic loved us. But other than that, there's amazing schools in Cleveland, and that was why it was our first option. But it also became, as our family grew, the ages of the kids grew, became more diverse than just the two in Gan or something like that, and the Chabad house grew. It was not, and we live in Cleveland, in Ohio, so we have snow, we have different factors. So what might have been an hour drive was turning into a 2.5-hour drive, and that became not very practical, for us. So Baruch Hashem, Chabad through the Shluchim office has what's called the Shluchim Online School, and it's virtual classrooms. So they have a teacher, a Rebbe, a Mora, depending on who's in the class, and then there's 8, 10, 12 other Talmidim sitting in the classrooms with them, and they're on a video camera and a microphone, and they learn. And it's very different in certain respects than the brick and mortar chadarim that we're familiar with, and socially it's a little bit different, but they also get a tremendous experience and chinuch and camaraderie with fellow shluchim around the world.
So your children are meeting online in a school setting, but online, students their age from all over the world.
Exactly. They can have classmates from, my daughter had a classmate from Finland at one point, and Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, Mexico, Argentina, Venezuela. So the school itself is divided into a Hebrew-speaking division or an English-speaking division, and then there's time zones within that. And then a few times a year, there's opportunities formally where they can meet their teachers and their classmates, whether it's by the Kinnus HaShluchim, Kinnus HaShluchais. The same organization, the Shluchim office, runs a winter camp for 10 days for the boys and girls respectively, and they can go for 10 days and be in a camp setting in the middle of the winter, and they get to meet each other, and they get that chizuk and the camaraderie of being with each other, which is really important. And then informally, they meet with each other, if we coincide and happen to be in Chronite or in our just all at the same time as a classmate or a teacher, will make the effort to link up. Or one time, one of my daughter's friends came here. They were somewhere, and then they came here, and she spent a week with us. And then they logged in together, and were in school together with the rest of their classmates on the computer, but them in person with each other. And then, as they get older and their learning develops, they have chavrusas online. There's a relatively sophisticated software that they use, so the students are able to learn. And, for some, like every school, there's things about it that you love, there's things about it you would change, and some of that just depends on the kid themselves and their personality. But it's a tremendous option where in the past, the parents either had to hire, somebody to come in to teach them, tutors, bachrim, girls, whatever it might be, or send them away very, very young, or homeschool them themselves, which is not always the best option either. And this is something that's really opened up new horizons. There's over 1,000 students in the Shluchim Online School, as far as I know.
Over 1,000 students.
Yeah, around the world.
Wow. Oh, that's terrific. Let me just recap what I'm hearing, because the messages are very strong. We're hearing that you can exist in the middle of nowhere, be at a secular campus, not compromise on your values. There are certainly challenges, hashkafically and halachically, but you're able to stick with your beliefs and even incorporate those beliefs to strengthen your children along the way. Is that what we're hearing right now?
I think 100%. I mean, again, like you said, there sometimes are challenges, or there's days that feel more challenging than others, but we're also very much driven by the mission of why the Rebbe sent shluchim around the world and elevating every corner of this globe with Torah, with mitzvahs, and to find every yid and together to make this world a holier place and a better place is a tremendous inspiration and drive to keep going every single day. And there's moments and flashes. I mean, just this past Shabbos, we were very fortunate. We have 5 bachrim in town. They came in to help with Shabbos and Purim and sticking around to help out for a little bit, getting us ready for Pesach. And they add a tremendous amount of energy also. And we had students streaming in for a Shabbos minyan, which is not always something we have to compromise on. Not something that's regular. We don't always have a minyan here, or very seldom have a minyan here for Shabbos. And we ourselves were very inspired. We had kids showing up, boys and girls showing up. Some of them we didn't even know, we'd never met before. They just saw my email that we were having a davening and they wanted to be a part of it. And so obviously that also inspires us to make sure not only to keep doing what we're doing, but that we're mechuyev to add in what we're doing. And these neshamas are thirsty and want it and need it. And it's our obligation to be there and bring that light and bring that goodness into the world.
Right. And how many shluchim are there worldwide, and how many are there on campuses?
Oh gosh, I think the numbers changed. The numbers are growing every time I go to Kinnus Shluchim. They add hundreds every year, but I think there's just around or just under 5,000 shluchim worldwide in an official capacity, and on campus, I think worldwide we're like at the 450 mark or so. It's a large percentage of those being in America, but growing Eretz Yisrael all over the former Soviet Union, Europe. I mean, it's really, really growing tremendously. And those are your official shluchim, but I think that not only Lubavitchers, but I can speak more comfortably for that community. You know, Lubavitchers, we have Balabatim that live up in Cleveland and feel invested on Shlichus and will come help out with various things at different times. And you have that all over the world as well. So there's the Shluchim themselves, and then the support network and support system around that, which is tremendous.
Tremendous. Ashreichem, Rabbi Elkan, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it as well. Have a good one.